Chapter 1255. That child. In the headquarters of the purgatory of heaven capital, uneasiness, hesitation, struggle, and different emotions permeated the crowd. Everything that happened today was too sudden. Everyone in the purgatory of heaven capital was not mentally prepared. They all thought that the problem between the purgatory of heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace was only between Li Tianlan and Li Guangtu. Both of them were from the Li family. Even if there was a difference in strength, they should not be in such a hurry to kill each other. Li Tianlan's youth became his greatest advantage against the purgatory of heaven capital. He still had too much time to put the already divided Li family back together and make the Li family better, so people thought that he would not use too drastic means. Li Tianlan's sword qi blocked the purgatory of heaven capital but did not kill anyone. The subsequent supply of materials confirmed this point. They thought that Li Tianlan would be gentle to the purgatory of heaven capital, slowly draw it to his side, and try to incorporate the purgatory of heaven capital into Emperor Dong's palace. But today, when no one was mentally prepared, Li Tianlan came to the purgatory of heaven capital again. Conciliatory? Roping him in? Convince? No, nothing at all. He directly announced the death of Li Guangtu, which instantly hurt Daybreak and Dawn. He didn't have much contact with the old people of the Li family and directly asked about the child of Li Guangtu and Phoenix. Li Guangtu had descendants. This was no longer a secret. This child was undoubtedly very special in the hearts of the old people in the purgatory of heaven capital. Those loyal to Li Guangtu would regard this child as the young master of the purgatory of heaven capital. Those who came from the Li family and stood on Li Guangtu's side regarded this child as the future young master of the Li family. For those old people who were in purgatory of heaven capital but had their hearts in Li Tianlan, they had mixed feelings about this child. Now hearing the news of Li Guangtu's death and seeing Li Tianlan come directly to ask about the child, almost everyone thought of a word: cut the weeds and pull up the roots. Many people could no longer remain silent. Li Huazhang was the first to speak. He said in a deep voice, "Tianlan, Huawu is Guangtu's flesh and blood." For Li Huazhang, it was another matter whether he recognized the child as the young master or not. But no matter what, the child was indeed the blood of the Li family. This identity alone was worthy of his protection. Li Tianlan was speechless for a while and asked, "What's the child's name?" "Hu, Li Hu, Li Huazhang, Li Huacheng, Li Hu this name. Is there really no one who would call it wrong? Regardless of whether someone yelled out the wrong number or not, someone would definitely call the wrong number. Right? He takes after his mother." Li Huazhang said in a low voice, "Jiang Huo." Li Tianlan glanced at Phoenix. For the first time, he learned Phoenix's surname. He nodded and said softly, "Where is he?" Li Huazhang raised his head and looked straight into Li Tianlan's eyes. He said calmly, "This is the bloodline of the Li family. Tianlan, are you really going to—" "I'm just looking." Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and smiled. "Uncle, do you think I shouldn't see it? Your Highness, may I know in what capacity does your Majesty have come to see young master?" A chubby middle-aged man stepped forward and smiled amiably, but his eyes were sharp. "Are you Emperor Dong Wang of Emperor Dong's palace, or a member of the Li family?" Li Tianlan was silent for a second and said faintly, "I don't understand. Who could translate it for me?" Beside the fat man, a woman who looked to be in her early 30s came out and said softly, "If your Majesty comes to visit young master as a member of the Li family, we naturally welcome you. But if you come as Emperor Dong Wang, you are the enemy of the purgatory of heaven capital. Although the purgatory of heaven capital is not strong, before we fall, we will certainly have the courage to stand in front of your Majesty. Your Majesty, why don't you have a try?" "Got it," Li Tianlan said with a smile. "Are you forcing me to take a stand? Young master? What young master?" "Of course, it's the young master of the Li family," the fat man said with a smile, his voice clear and firm. Li Tianlan looked at the fat man quietly. Everyone's eyes were also focused on the fat man. There were always some people whose loyalty was not as strong as Daybreak's performance, but they were equally fearless. I am the patriarch of the Li family, and I have never appointed a young master. Explain, how did this so-called young master of the Li family come about? Li Tianlan looked at the fat man's eyes aggressively. The fat man's face changed, and he said in a deep voice, His Highness Li Kuang-tu is the only son of Senior Li, and Hu is the legitimate son of His Highness. Naturally, he is the only heir of the Li family. Your Majesty, am I wrong? Li Tianlan looked at him quietly, and his voice did not fluctuate at all. Li Kuang-tu is indeed Grandpa's son, but when Grandpa died, he was not the designated heir. Of course I know. The fat man's voice sounded very respectful. His Highness has never been greedy for the position of patriarch of the Li family. What he wants to control is the purgatory of heaven capital. Before Senior Li died, Your Majesty did temporarily take charge of the Li family, but the Li family belongs to the Li family. Huawu is now the last lineal descendant of the Li family. If the Li family is not handed over to him, who else can it be handed over to? If Senior Li knew Huawu's birth, he would definitely make the same choice. The purgatory of heaven capital and Emperor Donghuang's palace. How can the people of the Li family be convinced if they don't hand over such a big foundation to Huawu? If they don't hand over such a big foundation to Huawu, will they always let outsiders take charge? Everyone looked at the fat man in shock. Li Huazhang's face changed. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought, but he did not know what to say. Li Tianlan seemed to be angry and laughed. So you mean that this child, named Huawu, will not only inherit the purgatory of heaven capital in the future, but I will also hand over Emperor Donghuang's palace to him, right? Is that what you mean? That's not what I mean. The fat man said softly. It's that the Li family really needs a reasonable and legal heir, and Huawu is now the only candidate. I believe that Senior Li's spirit in heaven will also agree to let Huawu take charge of the purgatory of heaven capital and Emperor Donghuang's palace. Your Majesty's contribution to the Li family is undeniable, and we are also grateful for your contribution to the Li family. We also hope that Your Majesty can make persistent efforts and train Huawu well in the future, so that he can completely take over Emperor Donghuang's palace and purgatory of heaven capital. Well, this was not only asking him to hand over all his current family property, but also to do his best to train the person who robbed him of his family property. Li Tianlan suddenly did not know what to say. Glib talk had never been his strength. Ridiculous. In the gloomy low roar, Li Huazhang, who had been silent, could not bear it anymore and stood up. Zhuqing, if you don't know the situation of the Li family, don't talk casually. Emperor Donghuang's palace is the foundation of his integration of various resources. Why should Huawu take over? The situation he created can't be taken away with a few words. Moreover, why do you say that Huawu will take over Emperor Donghuang's palace? Tianlan is the heir of the Li family appointed by Senior Li on his deathbed, not the temporary control of the Li family. Emperor Donghuang's palace, the Li family, and the purgatory of heaven capital should be his. Even if the Li family has a young master, it should be Tianlan's confirmed candidate. Li Huazhang stared coldly at the fat man who was called Zhuqing, and his voice became colder. Moreover, Zhuqing, you are just a guest of purgatory of heaven capital. You are not a guest of the Li family. When is it your turn to intervene in our affairs? Chapter 1256. Li Tianlan glanced at Li Huazhang in surprise. Because he left early, he had no deep impression of this uncle, so he couldn't judge his position. But at this time, his attitude was very clear. Obviously, he chose to stand on his side. Li Tianlan looked at the crowd around Li Huazhang again. A dozen people were not a large-scale group in the purgatory of heaven capital, but Li Tianlan was very familiar with a few of them. Seeing Li Tianlan looking over, they nodded slightly and raised the corners of their mouths, revealing a smile. Advisor Li, when Senior Li died, young Master Hu was not born, so Senior Li chose to let His Majesty East Emperor temporarily control the Li family. The chubby Zhui guest took a deep look at Li Huazhang. I still say the same thing. The Li family belongs to the Li family, so it should be inherited by the Leaf family. Now the Leaf family is divided into two, Emperor Dawn's palace and the purgatory of Heaven Capital. This is definitely not the situation that Seniorly wants to see. If he is still here, he will certainly hope that young Master Huawu can slowly integrate the power of the purgatory of Heaven Capital and Emperor Dawn's palace, and make the Leaf family strong again. I am a member of the Leaf family, Li Huazhang said coldly. But everyone knows that the Leaf family's power is mainly concentrated in the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Emperor Dawn's palace is the foundation of Tianlan, and its main body is Samsara Palace. What does it have to do with the Leaf family? As we guessed, I can understand that you regard Huawu as the young master of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. But the Leaf family belongs to Tianlan, and Emperor Dawn's palace belongs to Tianlan. We don't argue about whether Huawu is qualified to inherit the Leaf family. At least, he is not qualified to inherit Emperor Dawn's palace. What a joke. A sharp voice rang out from the back of the crowd. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly, and the corners of his mouth raised in an almost imperceptible curve. Here it came. The purpose of his coming here today was to see what kind of monsters were there in the purgatory of Heaven Capital. The more such people came out, the better. An old man who looked nearly 60 years old walked out of the crowd and said coldly, "Is there no power of the Leaf family in Emperor Dawn's palace?" The foundation of Emperor Dawn's palace was built by the Leaf family. Later, the Samsara Palace joined because of His Majesty Dongwang. The old man paused, looked straight into Li Tianlan's eyes, and said with a smile, "Your Majesty, if I may be so bold to ask, do you now think that you no longer belong to the Li family, but only to Dongwang?" Li Tianlan looked at him quietly. The old man in front of him looked the same as the left-honored guest, but he was also completely different. When the latter stepped forward, his gaze was calm. On the other hand, the eyes of the old man in front of him flickered. It was obvious that he was plotting something. "Who are you?" Li Tianlan asked directly. "Codename Tengu." The old man smiled and said, "Thank you, Your Highness Li Kuang-tu. I joined the Purgatory of Heaven Capital 5 years ago, and am now the Chief of Staff of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital." "So, you are not from the Li family?" Li Tianlan's voice was cold. "The Purgatory of Heaven Capital belongs to the Li family. I belong to the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, so naturally, I belong to the Li family." Heavenly Hound smiled and said, "I just don't know if His Majesty Dongwang still recognizes his identity as a member of the Li family. I naturally belong to the Li family." Li Tianlan sneered. Li Huazhang frowned slightly and suddenly felt that something was wrong. Heavenly Hound nodded and said in a gentle voice, "It's good that Your Majesty recognizes it. You are naturally a member of the Li family, but not a member of the Li family. I don't know if you recognize this." There was a commotion in the crowd. Li Tianlan frowned. Heavenly Hound seemed to be completely relaxed and said with a sneer, "I have talked about this with His Highness Li Kuang-tu. Your Majesty once claimed to be Senior Li's grandson. Everyone regarded you as the young master of the Li family, so you have your current status. In other words, all of us think that His Highness Li Kuang-tu is your biological father. But in fact, His Highness Li Kuang-tu told me personally that you have no blood relationship with him. Senior Li only has one son, His Highness. But Your Majesty, you are not His Highness' son. So are you a member of the Li family?" The commotion in the crowd strangely calmed down. This matter was no longer a secret, especially for the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. It was an open matter. Emperor Dawn's palace was like the sun at high noon. But the Purgatory of Heaven Capital could not hide its decline in the past 2 years. In order to stabilize his position, Li Kuang-tu had already made this matter public. This was also one of the reasons why some elders of the Li family were loyal to Li Tianlan, but were in a dilemma in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Li Tianlan did not speak. He just looked at Heavenly Hound silently and seemed to be unable to refute. Heavenly Hound's smile gradually widened, and the expression on his wrinkled old face gradually became a little playful. He believed that Li Tianlan did not dare to kill him today. If it was when he first appeared, it was still possible for Li Tianlan to suddenly make a move. But now he had named Li Tianlan's identity. He was a member of the Li family, but he was also an outsider of the Li family. Under this premise, if Li Tianlan killed him, it would only make people think that he was angry out of humiliation and even offend the public. The most important thing was that Li Guangtu was dead now. If Li Guangtu was alive, Heavenly Hound naturally did not dare to stand up and make irresponsible remarks. But now that Li Guangtu was dead, Heavenly Hound stood up and became a hero who tried his best to defend Li Guangtu's widow and child. This identity was enough to make Li Tianlan not dare to kill him. From this standpoint, once Li Tianlan killed him, he would never be able to take over the purgatory of Heaven Capital. He stood up to defend the interests of Phoenix and Li Huawu, which was to defend the interests of the Li family. At present, no matter what the specific standpoint of everyone was, there were absolutely few people who really wanted Li Tianlan to kill Li Huawu, and even Li Huazhan would not agree. It was not easy for him to reluctantly accept that Li Tianlan killed Li Guangtu. Moreover, the two sides were enemies, and it was natural that there would be life and death. But Li Huawu was just a 2-year-old child, and he had the blood of the Li family. Now he pointed out that Li Tianlan was an outsider. How could these people tolerate Li Tianlan killing Li Huawu? As long as Li Tianlan could not touch Li Huawu and his mother, he could not touch Heavenly Hound. To some extent, he and Zuoxian were the same, but they were also completely different. Zuoxian was just a visiting professor of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. This status was not low, but it could not be said to be too high. He could only be regarded as a high-level member of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. He stood up to protect Li Huawu and his mother, and even dared to regard Emperor Dong's palace as a part of the Li family. He was advancing in order to retreat. He was extremely loyal to Li Guangtu. What he did was nothing more than doing his best to protect the interests of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Naturally, he would not want Emperor Dong's palace. He just wanted to keep it a small part of the core interests of the purgatory of Heaven Capital as much as possible, so that Li Huawu could have the hope of making a comeback in the future. The Heavenly Hound was the chief of staff of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. This was the absolute core high level of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Its power and status could be said to be in the top 5. In terms of strength, compared to Dawn, the Heavenly Hound was not inferior at all. He protected Li Huawu and his mother, which could be said to be advancing in order to retreat, but what he wanted was to protect the entire purgatory of Heaven Capital. Who in the purgatory of Heaven Capital didn't know Li Tianlan's origin? Zuoxian naturally knew about it, but he didn't say anything. However, the Heavenly Hound directly pointed out this point. Just from this difference, it could already be seen that the two had completely different motives. The former was really to protect the Lord. The latter was to create a favorable situation for himself and then compete for benefits. The playful expression on the Heavenly Hound's face became more and more obvious. Today's situation was simply good for him. If he didn't seize it, he was afraid that he would be struck by lightning. As far as I know, His Majesty was just a child adopted by Senior Li. Senior Li taught His Majesty martial arts and raised His Majesty. He also sincerely hoped that His Majesty could help the Li family rise. The Heavenly Hound smiled and continued, "Everyone knows a lot of things, but there are also a lot of things that you don't know. His Highness Li Guangtu told me a lot when he was alive. Today, I'll talk to you about Senior Li. In order to let the Li family rise again, Senior Li made 3 arrangements. The first arrangement was naturally His Majesty. He kept His Majesty by his side and taught His Majesty everything that the Li family had learned. And his second arrangement was the purgatory of Heaven Capital. He constantly arranged for the veterans of the Li family to fake their deaths to escape and join the purgatory of Heaven Capital. That's how the present arrangement came about. What we're going to talk about now is the third arrangement. Senior Li secretly adopted a daughter and taught her all the unique skills of the Li family, including the 24 moves of sword, and has been in secret contact with her for many years. At the same time, Senior Li also passed a part of the Li family's secret skills to her. At the same time, Senior Li also secretly gave part of the Li family's property to this adopted daughter. Regarding this, in addition to Senior Li and the adopted daughter, only His Highness Li Kuang-tu knew about the existence of his adopted sister. The brother and sister had a very good relationship. Although they didn't see each other much, they were like-minded, and both of them were geniuses. At that time, the adopted daughter was in charge of part of the Li family's wealth and received the Li family's martial arts. Coupled with her own outstanding talent, she entered the invincible realm smoothly. The Heavenly Hound laughed. After entering the invincible realm, the adopted daughter set up a force and also set up a fund on the surface. In the crowd, the faces of many elites of the purgatory of Heaven Capital had gradually changed. The clear voice of the Heavenly Hound continued to echo. Everyone should have guessed that the adopted daughter was the master of Samsara Palace. She set up the Samsara Palace and also set up the Flourishing Age Fund on the surface. In fact, today's Emperor Dawn's palace originated from the Li family. The relationship between His Highness Li Kuang-tu and the master of Samsara Palace is very good, which has long been proved. Don't forget that the purgatory of Heaven Capital could appear in the dark world smoothly and occupy East Island because the master of Samsara Palace initiated the final battle of Heaven Capital. The words of the Heavenly Hound were powerful. The strange atmosphere continued to spread inside the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Some people were thoughtful. Some people were stunned. Some people suddenly understood. Some people were skeptical. The smile of the Heavenly Hound became more and more relaxed. He had expected all this. Everything he said could also be justified in the absence of key evidence. For example, the master of Samsara Palace did know the 24 moves of sword of the Li family, and even her martial arts was the 24 moves of sword. Another example was the final battle of Heaven Capital. From the current situation, it seemed that the Samsara Palace was indeed helping the purgatory of Heaven Capital to officially enter the secular world. These could all be explained. As for the truth, did it matter? Li Honghe was dead and would not deny him. Li Kuang-tu was dead and would not deny him. The master of Samsara Palace was dead and would not deny him. Without these key witnesses, what could Li Tianlan use to deny him? Moreover, would the dignified Dong Wang argue with him until he was flushed with anger? How could it be possible? The number one on the world divine list was invincible. Such an expert would definitely disdain to argue with him. But in the current situation, it was not appropriate for him to kill him. In such a deadlock, the best choice for Li Tianlan was to leave temporarily. The Heavenly Hound took 2 steps forward with unconcealable pride in his eyes. As long as Li Tianlan left, he would become the hero who protected Li Huawu and his mother today. As the chief of staff of the purgatory of Heaven Capital, he naturally had his own forces in the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Li Tianlan wanted to leave today. In order to save his face, he would inevitably take away a group of people who were loyal to him, led by Li Huazhang. Daybreak and Dawn were seriously injured. The purgatory of Heaven Capital was in a mess. This was what the Heavenly Hound wanted most. He just waited for Li Tianlan to leave, and then he would kill Daybreak by all means. The seriously injured Dawn was nothing to worry about. Next, he would use the power of the purgatory of Heaven Capital to promote the brother-sister relationship between the master of Samsara Palace and Li Kuang-tu, and then to promote that Li Hu was the legitimate heir of the Li family. It was unlikely for Li Huawu to inherit Emperor Dong's palace. No matter what, Li Tianlan could not be a man without a temper. But as long as he occupied this legitimate position, the Heavenly Hound could at least guarantee that he could keep the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Now, no matter how down and out the purgatory of Heaven Capital was, it was still the foundation of a superpower, representing power and wealth that others could not imagine. As long as he could control the purgatory of Heaven Capital, he would become one of the most powerful people in the dark world. It would be better if he could force Emperor Dawn's palace to give up part of its power. The Heavenly Hound's eyes suddenly became extremely hot. He glanced at Phoenix without anyone noticing. Phoenix seemed to have not come to her senses yet. She stood there blankly, with an unconcealable sadness and weakness on her mature and beautiful face. The Heavenly Hound's eyes swept over Phoenix's face and her graceful body curves. As long as everything went well today, The purgatory of heaven capital would be his, and the mistress that he secretly coveted would also be his. As long as he stabilized the purgatory of heaven capital, he would enter her and Li Kuang-tu's bedroom as soon as possible and completely conquer the beautiful and mature mistress in their bed. The heavenly hound's eyes turned and fell on Li Tianlan. He said with a smile, "I don't know if your majesty has doubts about the friendliness of the Samsara Palace. But no matter what, this is the truth. Young Master Huawu can inherit everything of the Li family, including Emperor Dong's palace, because it is a part of the Li family." Li Tianlan was lost in thought. Anger? He really didn't have this kind of emotion. If Li Tianlan hadn't had access to some information about the Flourishing Age Fund, maybe he would have believed the Heavenly Hound words. Grandpa's adopted daughter? Li Kuang-tu's adopted sister? Everything about the Samsara Palace had nothing to do with Li Tianlan. The Arabian Nights was unimaginable, a bunch of nonsense. Except for military counselor, no one in the world could really understand the Flourishing Age Fund. It was an empire of wealth hidden in the dark. What was exposed to the outside was just the tip of the iceberg. And this tip of the iceberg seemed to be written with Li Tianlan's name after the Samsara Palace was merged into the East Emperor Palace. But there were more hidden wealth, the shares that were secretly purchased from the major groups, and all the secrets that others couldn't find out. Li Tianlan was the real owner. From the beginning to the end, there was no so-called transfer. From the very beginning, when the master of Samsara Palace got those interests on those secret contracts, Li Tianlan's name was written, not the Li family's. Similarly, in many places, the master of Samsara Palace also left many traps specifically for the Li family. She obviously considered the existence of Li Kuang-tu. These traps were aimed at Li Kuang-tu and the power of the Li family. In the plan of the master of Samsara Palace, if Li Tianlan really failed in the battle with Li Kuang-tu, even if Li Tianlan's martial arts were all destroyed, as long as he was alive, he could use these traps to cause unimaginable huge trouble for the Li family when it annexed the Flourishing Age Fund. The intention behind this was self-evident. So, Li Kuang-tu and the master of Samsara Palace had a deep sibling relationship. It was better to say that Gu Xingyun was Wang Tianzong's long-lost younger brother. Moreover, even if there were none of these things, when the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and the East Emperor Palace existed at the same time, the Flourishing Age Fund chose Li Tianlan instead of Li Kuang-tu. This alone was enough to disprove the Heavenly Hound statement. Li Tianlan didn't bother to talk nonsense. He just glanced at Heavenly Hound and said lightly, "Who else thinks the same as this chief of staff? Stand out and let me see." After a moment of silence, a few more people came out. The crowd was even quieter. There were not many people who came out to support Heavenly Hound, only 5 or 6, but they were not unknown people. They were all people in various key positions in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. They were undoubtedly Heavenly Hound's team. Li Tianlan found that he didn't know any of these people, and he could confirm that they were not old people from the Li family. He was slightly relieved. Heavenly Hound took a step forward, bowed slightly, and said softly, "Thank you for your dedication to the Li family, Your Majesty. Now, please return Emperor Dong's palace. We will assist young Master Huawu to control everything. Your Majesty can rest assured." A blatant seizure of power. Li Tianlan looked at the crowd behind Heavenly Hound. No one clearly supported this small team. But when many people met Li Tianlan's eyes, they subconsciously looked away. Among them, there were many veterans of the Li family that Li Tianlan was familiar with. Li Tianlan understood Heavenly Hound's reliance. Perhaps in the minds of Heavenly Hound and others, he came today to subdue the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, not to kill people. After all, in their minds, Li Kuang-tu was already dead, and it was meaningless to kill others. Instead, it would disappoint these old people of the Li family. So Heavenly Hound and others seemed to stand out fearlessly and clamor for power. But in fact, they wanted to keep the Purgatory of Heaven Capital advancing in order to retreat. And these old people of the Li family, Li Tianlan was silent. He could probably understand their silence. In a sense, this could not be called betrayal. Heavenly Hound talked a lot of nonsense, but at least one thing was true. That was, although his name was Li Tianlan, the real situation was that his surname was not Li. He was not the grandson of Li Honghe, nor the son of Li Guangtu. In terms of blood relationship, he was indeed an outsider of the Li family. How important was his surname? When the treason case broke out abruptly, the Li family was full of talents and experts. It was no exaggeration to say that if everyone in the Li family's camp revealed the intention to change sides, it was not difficult for anyone to find another way out. But these people didn't die from the beginning to the end. They followed Li Honghe out of Yuzhou and the highest stage of Zhongzhou state and endured more than 20 years of suffering. Some people faked their deaths to get away, but many others really died on the border. Why did all this? It was for the name Li. When Li Tianlan was Li Honghe's grandson, everyone regarded him as the young master and the future hope of the Li family. Under Li Honghe's will, they were even willing to stand against Li Guangtu for him. But now, his true identity had not been exposed. But Li Guangtu had already said that Li Tianlan had nothing to do with him. In such a situation, Li Tianlan had nothing to do with Li Guangtu, which meant that he had no blood relationship with the Li family in many people's minds. Some people could accept this and choose to follow Li Honghe's will to stand by Li Tianlan. There were some such people in Emperor Dong's palace. There were also some in the purgatory of heaven capital headed by Li Huazhang. And the others, they didn't want to choose Li Guangtu, especially after Li Guangtu chose to cooperate with Gu Xingyun. But they were also entangled in the issue of Li Tianlan's identity. So at this moment, facing Li Tianlan, they could only remain silent. Uncle Huiyun, do you agree with Heavenly Hound? Li Tianlan began to call names directly. His eyes fell on a one-armed middle-aged man. This was an old man of the Li family whom Li Tianlan was very familiar with. He left the border camp a year earlier than Li Tianlan and had a very good relationship with him. Compared with Li Tianlan's somewhat indifferent impression of Li Huazhang, Li Tianlan had more things to remember about this Uncle Huiyun. The first roasted hamster he had eaten when he was a child was given to him by this uncle. In that camp, it was already an extremely rare delicacy. The corners of Huiyun's mouth moved, and he felt a little bitter. Your teacher is now in Reki City and will be back soon. Aren't you going to go back with me to see him? Li Tianlan continued to ask. Uncle Huiyun was Fireman's apprentice, which many people knew. He had planned to follow Fireman's path and break through to the invincible realm at the Fire-Flaming Realm. But after the treason case, Fireman was imprisoned in the desert prison. Disheartened, Huiyun entered the thunder-shocking realm. Later, he was injured in a battle at the border and lost an arm. He had no hope of entering the invincible realm, but he should always remember the friendship of those years. God, Uncle Huiyun gave a wry smile and seemed to want to call his name. But as soon as the words came out, he sighed and said hoarsely, Your Majesty, what's your surname? Is it important? Li Tianlan looked into his eyes and said in a soft voice, I grew up in the Li family. Whether I'm related by blood or not, Senior Li will always be my grandfather. I'm a member of the Li family and the current patriarch of the Li family. What's different? It's different, Huiyun murmured. Li Tianlan was silent for a moment and said softly, If you insist on an answer, Uncle, in terms of blood relationship, my surname should be Dongchen. He suddenly froze. By now, he had already known his background, but he had been avoiding it. So far, he only knew his surname, but he didn't know what his name was in the Dongcheng clan. Dongcheng clan, Dongcheng Rushi. Huiyun froze for a moment, and his eyes suddenly lit up. Vaguely, he seemed to know Li Honghe's plan at that time. Heavenly Hound obviously realized something. His face changed obviously, and he said in a deep voice, Since your Majesty has admitted that your surname is not Li, how can you be the patriarch of the Li family? We can discuss about Emperor Dong's palace slowly, but the purgatory of heaven capital belongs to the Li family. How can it be handed over to the Dongcheng clan? How? I'm talking to the senior. What right do you have to interrupt? Li Tianlan glanced at Heavenly Hound coldly. Heavenly Hound took half a step back subconsciously, then gritted his teeth and stood where he was. He said in a cold voice, Your Majesty is really overbearing, but as a member of the purgatory of heaven capital, don't I even have a right to speak? Your Majesty came here today to conquer the purgatory of heaven capital. In any case, I, Heavenly Hound, will be the first to be unconvinced. Conquer the purgatory of heaven capital. Li Tianlan murmured to himself, and then suddenly laughed. He looked at Heavenly Hound, and the temperature in his eyes dropped little by little, getting colder and colder. Who told you that I came here today to conquer the purgatory of heaven capital? Uneasiness rose from Heavenly Hound's heart without warning. He suddenly raised his head. In his sight was Li Tianlan's indifferent face without any expression. I came here today. Li Tianlan's voice paused. I came here to kill. The sword energy surged. With Heavenly Hound as the center, the space within a radius of several meters instantly froze. The small team centered on Heavenly Hound was completely enveloped by the sword energy, and no one was missing. The sword energy extended without any warning, but Zhuo Xian, who had just spoken, was missed. The faces of Heavenly Hound and the others changed dramatically, and they almost instinctively broke out with all their strength. The blue arc of lightning flashed in the sword energy for a moment. Humph! Li Tianlan snorted coldly. The sword energy around them suddenly rotated. It was silent. The flashing arc of lightning was completely extinguished. Heavenly Hound, whose eyes were full of remorse, opened his mouth. Your Majesty, please. Before he could finish his words, the layers of sword chi had already streaked across each of their bodies like streams of light. Their bodies were torn apart silently. Blood gushed out. The dense sword light kept flying. Before the pieces of the corpses and blood fell to the ground, they had been completely smashed into pieces of powder by the endless sword energy. The red powder fell to the ground, and it was dark red. The audience was silent. Before everyone came to their senses, Li Tianlan's voice continued to ring. At the same time, let Li Kuang see what kind of state the purgatory of heaven capital is now. Phoenix's body suddenly shook. She looked up at Li Tianlan and said in a hoarse voice, "What did you say? Tianlan Kuangtu is not dead?" Li Huazhang also came to his senses and asked hurriedly, "He's still alive." Li Tianlan nodded. "If I didn't say that he was dead, how could I see today's good show?" His mood was up and down. The crowd became more and more silent. Li Tianlan glanced at Huiyun again. It seemed that he was talking to him, but also to all the elders of the Li family. "In terms of blood, I am indeed an outsider of the Li family, but Rushi is Grandpa's biological granddaughter and Li Kuangtu's biological daughter. You can go to Emperor Dong's palace to find Li Kuangtu and ask if it is true. Like Grandpa, I despise Li Kuangtu, but this man's pride and stubbornness have not changed for many years. At least he still has a sense of shame. You can ask if Rushi is his daughter, and you can ask if he really has a deep sibling relationship with the master of Samsara Palace." Li Tianlan's body slowly rose into the air. Grandpa doesn't approve of Li Kuangtu, and the future of the Li family has nothing to do with him. But Rushi is my woman, and her health is slowly improving. In the future, the child of Rushi and me will naturally be the heir of the Li family and the future patriarch of the Li family. In the headquarters of the purgatory of heaven capital, the sword energy that blocked the sky dissipated silently. That's all I have to say. From today on, the purgatory of heaven capital will be free. You can choose your side freely. Those who choose to return to Emperor Dong's palace are still my uncles and aunties. Those who stand on the opposite side of Emperor Dong's palace are my enemies from now on." His figure took a step forward in the air and disappeared instantly. The next second, Li Tianlan's body appeared in the bedroom of the villa in the center of the purgatory of heaven capital. The spacious bedroom was surrounded by the faint body fragrance of a woman, which seemed to be the smell of Phoenix. In a small bed beside the big bed, a child who looked only 2 or 3 years old was sleeping soundly. Li Tianlan looked at the child quietly, his eyes extremely calm. He took a step forward and stretched out his finger. Chapter 12:57. The moment when his fingers were about to fall. In a slightly narrow room, The sudden surge of mental power exploded into a pure and sharp sword aura. The sword energy was dense and sharp, spreading in every corner of the room. The tea table, the chair, the dining table, and the tea were completely shattered, and the water splashed in the air. For a moment, it seemed that everything in the room had become a sword, and all of them rushed to Li Tianlan. "What the fuck do you want to do?" "Li Tianlan, if you dare to touch Wu, I will make you pay." The violent and suppressed roar echoed in the room, and Li Guangtu's body rushed over with the flying sword energy. Li Tianlan's body moved. There was a slight sound of civilization in the room. A transparent air vortex rotated rapidly with Li Tianlan as the center, and the sword energy rushing from behind all pierced into the vortex and became a part of it. The transparent vortex expanded, and the edge hit Li Guangtu hard, directly sweeping his body out. The expanding vortex covered half of the room, and also Li Huacheng, who was standing beside Li Tianlan. Li Guangtu, whose body hit the wall hard, looked pale, but instantly turned red. He stared at Li Tianlan with a twisted expression, with monstrous anger. Look, he's anxious." Li Tianlan pointed to Li Guangtu and said to Li Huacheng. Li Huacheng's mouth twitched, and he didn't speak. He squinted and quietly looked at the bright screen in front of him. The huge screen was clear and bright, showing the bedroom on the other side of the screen perfectly in front of them. There was another Li Tianlan on the screen. At this time, he was standing in front of the baby's crib, stretching out his finger and gently tapping the face of the sleeping baby. The 2-year-old child moved in a daze and turned over, but he didn't wake up. Instead, he stretched out 2 chubby little hands in his sleep and held Li Tianlan's finger. Inside and outside the screen, a smile appeared on the lips of the 2 Li Tianlan at the same time. "No matter how complicated the grudge between us is, I won't go so far as to attack a child. Why are you nervous?" Li Tianlan slowly turned around and glanced at Li Guangtu. Li Guangtu snorted and struggled to stand up. His physical condition was extremely poor. He had never recovered from the serious injuries he suffered in the chaos of Snow Country. He was even more seriously injured in the battle in North Sea. Later, he participated in the siege of Li Tianlan. If Xianyuan Wushang hadn't taken action after he was captured, Li Guangtu wouldn't have woken up now. He had been held captive for more than a month, and Li Guangtu had been trying to recover from his injuries. Naturally, there was some effect, but with the forced attack just now, his injuries suddenly worsened again. "What do you want?" Li Guangtu looked into Li Tianlan's eyes and asked. Li Tianlan's expression was calm, and his eyes seemed deep and empty. But looking at Li Tianlan's expression now, he couldn't capture anything. If he wasn't very familiar with the 24 moves of sword, Li Guangtu wouldn't even be sure that what was left in Emperor Dong's palace was just a sword chi doppelganger. Xianyuan City, Tiandu City. The 2 cities were hundreds of kilometers apart. Li Tianlan's real body went to the purgatory of Heaven Capital, but the sword chi doppelganger could still move around in Emperor Dong's palace. The most exaggerated thing was that the 2 sides were obviously connected to each other. That was to say, Li Tianlan's real body knew what was happening here. Every word he said was equivalent to Li Tianlan communicating with him through the sword chi doppelganger hundreds of kilometers away. In a sense, this was no longer something that could be explained by pure martial arts. Not to mention that he hadn't broken through. Even if Li Tianlan really entered that supreme realm, he couldn't do this. Now the real body and the doppelganger were so far away from each other, but they could still communicate with each other. The only explanation was that Ruthless, or Xianyuan Feng, was here. Ruthless energy had been used up, but it was not completely gone. Its remaining energy was enough to stimulate the activity on the sword body, and then carry Li Tianlan's sword chi to form a special sword chi doppelganger. And the ability to do this also proved that the relationship between Xianyuan Feng and Li Tianlan could no longer be said to be a simple relationship between man and sword. The bond between man and sword was constantly deepening. Now Xianyuan Feng could almost be said to be a part of Li Tianlan's body. Li Tianlan picked up the remote control and turned off the screen in front of him. What would happen next in the purgatory of heaven, capital hundreds of kilometers away, except for Li Tianlan, Li Guangtu, and Li Huacheng could no longer see. Li Guangtu's heart sank slightly. What do I want? Didn't I make it clear enough? Li Tianlan said calmly. I want the purgatory of heaven capital. Now I can let you go. After returning to the headquarters of the purgatory of heaven capital, I will announce that the purgatory of heaven capital is officially incorporated into Emperor Dong's palace. The overall structure of the purgatory of heaven capital will be retained. I will only select a part of the core personnel to enter Emperor Dong's palace. From now on, you can become the first deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's palace. At the same time, the purgatory of heaven capital will still be under your leadership. Emperor Dong's palace will not interfere with the development of the purgatory of heaven capital. But when necessary, the purgatory of heaven capital must be under my command. As long as Emperor Dong's palace exists, the name of the purgatory of heaven capital will exist. After your death, Huawei will completely inherit the purgatory of heaven capital and maintain a higher degree of freedom. After a pause, Li Tianlan continued, I don't like roundabout things, and I don't like negotiations. But after knowing of your existence, I've always wanted to talk to you. I didn't want to see you before because I was giving you the cold shoulder, hoping that you could calm down. Between you and me, there's no need to play the game of asking for a sky-high price and returning the money on the spot. I've given you the conditions, and this is my bottom line. Grandpa asked me to take charge of the Leaf family before he died, so I have the obligation to take all the power of the Leaf family into my hands. The purgatory of heaven capital must be incorporated into Emperor Dong's palace, just as I said. If you say anything else, I won't agree. What I can decide is what I told you, and it is also the structure of Emperor Dong's palace in the future. In Li Guangtu's silence, Li Tianlan simply summarized, if I am Zhongzhou State, you are Beihai. This was Li Tianlan's attitude. It was clear, without any leeway, aggressive, but it also gave Li Guangtu enough space. What he wanted was the integrity of the Leaf family, to conquer the purgatory of heaven capital, and to conquer Li Guangtu. But he would not interfere too much with the internal affairs of the purgatory of heaven capital and give it a high degree of freedom. But nominally, the purgatory of heaven capital must belong to Emperor Dong's palace and become a subsidiary force of Emperor Dong's palace. And when necessary, that is, when facing foreign enemies, the purgatory of heaven capital must unite with Emperor Dong's palace against foreign enemies. It was equivalent to the relationship between Zhongzhou State and Beihai Province today. However, when these conditions were listed one by one, Emperor Dong's palace gave more restrictions to the purgatory of heaven capital than Zhongzhou State gave to Beihai. But these extra restrictions were for better control of the purgatory of heaven capital. In other words, as long as the purgatory of heaven capital was dominated by the Li family and Emperor Dong's palace, the purgatory of heaven capital was highly free. Li Tianlan felt that he had done his best in this condition, and the conditions in all aspects were also very mature. Emperor Dong's palace had fully developed, and it was the era of Emperor Dong. In front of everyone in Emperor Dong's palace, there was a beautiful picture of mountains and rivers. Zhongzhou State, Tianan, East Island, Europe, America. Time passed, and the shadow of Emperor Dong's palace would spread to the whole world over time. Such an Emperor Dong's palace had completely suppressed the purgatory of heaven capital in terms of influence, talent reserve, high-end combat capability, wealth, and intelligence channels. And Li Tianlan himself had reached the top of the divine list. The siege also fully showed that Li Tianlan's personal combat capability had completely surpassed Li Guangtu's. Throughout the hundreds of years of the Li family, Li Tianlan could now be said to be the strongest patriarch. And now he had caught Li Guangtu, controlled his life and death, and controlled the life and death of his children. Under such circumstances, he gave Li Guangtu his own conditions. If Li Guangtu still refused, then no matter what happened in the future, he would basically not change his attitude. This was the final negotiation between the two branches of the Li family, and Li Huacheng was the witness. And Li Tianlan also gave conditions that were not difficult to accept, including what he had just told Li Guangtu. The high degree of freedom after the purgatory of heaven capital joined Emperor Dong's palace, and his position in Emperor Dong's palace. The first deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace was completely under Li Tianlan. With Li Tianlan's temperament, since he gave him this position, it was impossible that he would not dare to give him the responsibility he should bear. So Li Kuang-tu did not have to worry about having no real power in Emperor Dong's palace. There were 3 deputy palace lords in Emperor Dong's palace: Saint, Hidden God, and Li Shi. What did this mean? First of all, Saint used to be the first senior brother of Mount Shu. The 4 sword masters of Mount Shu were now in different positions, but they had a very good personal relationship with each other. Now Yun Qinshi, the phantom sword master, was in the purgatory of heaven capital. If Li Kuang-tu was willing to join Emperor Dong's palace, Saint would not take the initiative to make things difficult for Li Kuang-tu because of his relationship with Yun Qinshi. In the same way, Li Beitian would not make things difficult for Li Kuang-tu. Situ Sangyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State, was Li Kuang-tu's confidant many years ago. Now she chose to stand on Li Tianlan's side. After Li Kuang-tu joined, no matter whether the two could get back together or not, the old friendship would always be there. In the case of not violating the principle, Situ Sangyue would also support Li Kuang-tu to a certain extent. Li Shi's situation was even more complicated. The grievances between her and Li Kuang-tu were enough to be written in a book. But if they were really in the same camp, Li Shi might not fully support Li Kuang-tu, but at least she would not make things difficult for him. Such a situation could be said to be very good. As long as Li Kuang-tu was willing to come with the purgatory of heaven capital, he did not have to worry about whether he could gain a foothold in Emperor Dong's palace or not. He could quickly establish his own prestige in Emperor Dong's palace and work together with Li Tianlan to make Emperor Dong's palace better, to make the Li family surpass the peak of the past hundreds of years, and to create a new situation. The high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace would not make things difficult for him. With the purgatory of heaven capital and his own strength, he could become a super heavyweight in Emperor Dong's palace, and his status was only below Li Tianlan. The most important thing was, it was the condition that Li Tianlan did not tell him, but he heard through the screen. Dongqing Rushi was his daughter. Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi's future child would inherit the Li family. If Li Tianlan was an outsider, then the child born by Dongqing Rushi could definitely be regarded as the blood of the Li family. So, what was there for Li Kuang-tu to be dissatisfied with? Li Kuang-tu was silent and seemed to be thinking, but there was silence in his eyes. Li Tianlan waited patiently for a full 5 minutes before he calmly said, "Agree or refuse? You won't kill me, will you?" Li Kuang-tu suddenly laughed. He looked at Li Huacheng, who had been silent, and said, "President, he won't kill me, will he?" Li Huacheng, who had been watching silently, chuckled and did not speak. He naturally wanted to save Li Kuang-tu's life. But now that he said this, there was no doubt that he was making the decision for Li Tianlan. At this time, how could Li Huacheng make such a mistake? We all understand. Li Kuang-tu's smile gradually widened. Although I don't know what happened outside, I know that the president has lived here for a while. What is worth him doing this? He looked at Li Tianlan and said lightly, "I think I still have some value, so if I'm not wrong, the president came for me, right? He wants you to let me go, and you don't intend to let me go, so you have a conflict?" Li Tianlan did not speak, just looked at him silently. "So as long as the president is still here, it means that the parliament can use me, so you dare not kill me." Li Tianlan still did not speak. Today, he and Li Huacheng came to see Li Kuang-tu. Naturally, it was not a sudden idea. It was the first time that Li Huacheng came to him after living here for so long, and he seriously asked to see Li Kuang-tu. With Qin Weibai's previous reminder, Li Tianlan naturally understood that the other party was going to have a showdown with him. But Qin Weibai said that something would happen in Yuzhou these days. But now Emperor Dong's palace had not received any news. Li Huacheng's showdown with him this time seemed a little sudden. But Li Tianlan was ready, and there was no reason to refuse him. So he came here with Li Huacheng. He gave him the conditions, and the timing was perfect. Whether he would be an enemy or a friend in the future depended on Li Kuang-tu's choice. He had spared Li Kuang-tu's life, and now he gave him the best opportunity. If he still could not grasp it, Li Tianlan did not think he could do more. I refuse. Li Kuang-tu looked at Li Tianlan and said with a smile, maybe the conditions you offer are very tempting, but this is not what I want. In this world, only I am qualified to represent the Li family. Even if I am not your opponent for the time being, you're not qualified to represent the Li family. If I can't beat you, I will join you. If I, Li Kuang-tu, am such a person, I don't deserve today's achievements. The Li family was stubborn. Li Kuang-tu was not only stubborn, but also completely extreme. Li Tianlan took a deep look at him. Li Kuang-tu's eyes were full of persistence, and behind this persistence, there was also a touch of hatred. Li Tianlan naturally did not know that the teenager named Huawu died in the final battle of Heaven Capital, and he did not want to know. What he knew was the current result. Li Kuang-tu chose to refuse. Don't you worry about the headquarters of the purgatory of Heaven Capital? Don't you worry about your woman and son? Li Tianlan asked. Does it make sense? Li Kuang-tu's smile remained unchanged, and his voice was indifferent. You kill them, and you'd better kill me. From today on, the Li family will be destroyed with me. Otherwise, if I don't die today, if you dare to touch them, I'm indeed not your opponent, but in the whole Emperor Dong's palace, who else can be my opponent except you? Li Tianlan nodded. You refuse. Only I can represent the Li family. Li Kuang-tu said indifferently, I refuse. His attitude was clear, and there was no room for negotiation. Li Tianlan nodded and slowly turned around. He glanced at Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing was also looking at him. His eyes were a little relaxed and a little expectant. Li Tianlan nodded to him and said, You talk. He had finished talking with Li Kuang-tu. This was also the only time they had a formal conversation. He gave the conditions. Li Kuang-tu chose to refuse. That was all. It was simple. Li Tianlan walked slowly to the door. When he was about to go out, he paused and said calmly, I won't kill you today, but from today on, you and I are enemies. Chapter 1258. The sound of the door closing was very slight. This showed that Li Tianlan did not have any anger or unwillingness when he left. It was simple to come and simple to leave. Li Tianlan put forward the conditions. Li Kuang-tu refused his conditions. The future of the Li family, countless people, countless related families, the pattern of the dark world, unimaginable interests, the future path of the Li family, and the future situation. All of this was like the most ordinary business. They didn't agree on a price, so they parted ways. There was no regret or anger in his words. There might be regret, but it was far from enough to make people turn back. Li Kuang-tu sat on the ground without any image, leaning against the wall for a long time. Then he took out a pack of cigarettes from his trouser pocket and lit one silently. Through the lingering smoke, Li Huaqing's figure seemed to be a little blurred. Li Kuang-tu suddenly smiled and said indifferently, Am I free now? You're not really free until you leave Emperor Dong's palace. Li Huaqing sat down on the sofa and said with a smile, You sit down too. I've always wanted to talk to you, but I never had a chance. Today is not the right time, but the occasion is very suitable and safe. Besides, with Tianlan's character, he won't eavesdrop on us. Li Kuang-tu thought about it, stood up, and sat opposite Li Huaqing. He puffed out the smoke and remained silent. I'm curious, Li Huaqing said slowly. Why didn't you agree with Tianlan? To be honest, I never thought of the conditions he put forward. The autonomy of the purgatory of Heaven Capital, the first deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, and the future heir of the Li family. What are you dissatisfied with? Pride, paranoia, unwillingness? These could be said to be reasons, but they were not decisive reasons. The three people who put forward this condition, heard this condition, and witnessed this condition all knew very well what this condition meant. Once Li Kuang-tu accepted it, although he, the first deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, would be under Li Tianlan, the purgatory of Heaven Capital would maintain a pretty good autonomy. Even if Li Tianlan would take away part of the core of the purgatory of Heaven Capital At least he had to ensure the normal structure of the purgatory of heaven capital. That was to say, the framework of the purgatory of heaven capital would not change. At least the three top masters, Daybreak, Dawn, and Phoenix, would stay. The elite forces of life-prolonging, undying, and Sunluo temples would also stay. Part of the industries and intelligence agencies of the Purgatory of Heaven capital would also stay. Although Li Kuang-tu became the Deputy Palace Lord, he could still completely lead the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Although Li Tianlan was the Palace Lord and could control the Purgatory of Heaven capital to a certain extent, he could not interfere in everything. With the position of the first Deputy Palace Lord and the identities of the other Deputy Palace Lords, Li Kuang-tu could not only control the Purgatory of Heaven capital, but also control Emperor Dong's palace to a certain extent. It was impossible for Emperor Dong's palace to settle accounts after the fall, be made a mere figurehead, get rid of the donkey when it was no longer of use, and burn the bridge after crossing the river. Every word of Li Tianlan's condition revealed his sincerity. The two sides exchanged resources at the bottom line. When Li Tianlan could control the Purgatory of Heaven capital to a certain extent, Li Kuang-tu could also control Emperor Dong's palace to a certain extent. This was a real win-win situation, a real integration. The Li family would be reunited into one, which was the best situation. And if this merger was successful, both the Purgatory of Heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace would be greatly strengthened, which was good for both of them. In this state, as long as Li Kuang-tu gave up his current thoughts and did not target Li Tianlan could not target him again. No matter how much Li Kuang-tu disliked Li Tianlan, he could just wait. The next patriarch of the Li family was the daughter of Li Tianlan and Dongsheng Rushi, Li Kuang-tu's grandson. Under the circumstances that Li Tianlan and Dongsheng Rushi's names were unlikely to be changed, when a child was born, he would not call Li Kuang-tu grandfather, but grandfather. And if he sincerely joined Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan could accept him. Even if he did not call him father, he would treat him as an elder. In this way, when the child took over, the grievances between Li Tianlan and Li Kuang-tu would naturally disappear. Similarly, with the child taking over, the entanglement between the Purgatory of Heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace would be meaningless. Li Hou's branch could also naturally integrate into the Li family, and there would be no distinction between them, as long as Li Kuang-tu did not treat himself as an outsider. Then no one in Emperor Dong's palace would treat him as an outsider. What was wrong with such a result? But Li Kuang-tu actually refused. Li Tianlan was not a very aggressive person, but Li Huaqing still did not expect that he would give Li Kuang-tu such an excellent condition. This was completely impossible in Li Huaqing's mind. After all, everyone could see that the strength of Emperor Dong's palace was now far greater than that of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The condition that Li Tianlan mentioned could only be put forward when the strength of the two sides was equal. But now, it was completely unnecessary. Now Li Tianlan insisted on taking over Emperor Dong's palace and hardened his heart to let more people die on both sides. Throwing Li Kuang-tu a guest position with no real power seemed to be a very good choice. But Li Tianlan did not beat around the bush. When he had completely gained the upper hand and even controlled the life and death of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, he gave Li Kuang-tu such a condition. What made Li Huaqing even more puzzled was that Li Kuang-tu actually refused. The Li family was stubborn? Was this kind of stubbornness a fool? Li Huaqing looked at Li Kuang-tu smoking another cigarette, but he didn't mean to give one to himself. He shook his head, took out a cigarette box, and lit one. You should be very clear that he can't have better conditions. He can't give you the position of the Palace Lord of Emperor Dong's palace. He can't give you this, and what he gives you is the best. You can feel this kind of sincerity. So why? Why? A very complicated light flashed in Li Kuang-tu's eyes. There were too many reasons to tell Li Huaqing why. He took a deep drag on the cigarette, and the smoke slowly came out of his nostrils and mouth. Li Kuang-tu smiled. So he is still too young. He brought you here to talk to me. There are 3 people here, but you didn't speak, so he regarded this negotiation as a matter of two people. Li Quantu squinted at Li Huaqing. I believe that Li Tianlan is not so scheming now. There are some things that he can't figure out for the time being. After all, he is still not mature enough. But don't you understand? Li Huaqing was silent. Qin Wei Bai. Li Quantu suddenly asked. I don't know. Li Huaqing shook his head. Li Quantu sneered, and his voice was a little cold. She is a disaster to the country and the people. That which deserves to die. Li Huaqing couldn't help laughing. Which? Everything she did was for Tianlan. Not to mention a little infamy. Even if there were more things, as long as it was beneficial to Tianlan, she would not hesitate to do it. You hate her to the bone, but doesn't she hate you to the bone? You have tried to kill her man many times. Do you still want to be extravagant? Do you expect her to give you a good end? To be able to meet such a woman is your luck, fortune, and destiny. If you had such a woman by your side all those years ago, how could you appear here today? Li Huaqing was silent. At this moment, he thought of Li Shi, the woman who was really willing to let him give up a lot of things to protect. In the battle at the border that year, the Li family collapsed, and the winner took all. But now looking back, if Li Shi had helped him with all her strength at that time, instead of choosing to stab him at the most critical moment, what would the result be? Li Quantu took a deep breath and didn't speak. His face was gloomy. If I hadn't come with Tianlan, would you have agreed to his conditions? Li Huaqing looked at Li Quantu and asked. At this moment, there seemed to be a lot of things hidden in his eyes. Li Quantu sneered. If I had agreed to his conditions, would you have let me and the purgatory of heaven capital live? Li Huaqing didn't speak. He sat there quietly, as calm as the ocean. The answer is obvious, isn't it? Li Quantu said in a mocking tone. President, you and I are of the same generation. When I was at the height of my success, you had just started. When you had a meteoric rise, I had been knocked down from the clouds to the dust. But I know far more about Zhongzhou State and you than Li Tianlan. Zhongzhou State's evaluation of you is that you are gentle and stable. This evaluation is indeed correct, but it is only one side of it. At the critical moment, your former opponents are very clear about how ruthless you are. Those who have really paid attention to you are also very clear about it. After I joined Emperor Dong's palace, and the purgatory of heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace merged into one, the power in Li Tianlan's and my hands has more than doubled. Li Tianlan, me, Lin Fengting, Li Shizana, Saint Daybreak, Military Counselor Dawn, Phoenix, Cool Breeze, Drifting Cloud, Yin Qinshi, Li Beitian by Yu Ming. After all the hidden dangers of the Li family are eliminated, what kind of strength is this to put out this lineup? Not to mention this era. Even in the peak of the Wang family of Beihai, I'm talking about the period when the Wang family of Beihai had the Li family. Can Beihai resist our lineup? The combination of this lineup means that Emperor Dong's palace and the purgatory of heaven capital will no longer have any opponents in the dark world. It means that Li Tianlan and I will really keep our word in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. It means that we can instantly unify Tiannan. It means that we can directly recapture East Island. It means that we can directly conquer Beihai. Can you sleep with such a lineup in front of you? What's the point of winning over Jiang Shangyu and protecting Gu Xingyun in front of such a lineup? It's meaningless, Li Huaqing said with a serious face. If it's meaningless, it can't exist. Li Quantu said blandly. It's not Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun that can't exist, but me and even Emperor Dong's palace. In the final analysis, it's the Li family. According to the character of the current young patriarch of Beihai, stability should be the priority in the next few years. And with all due respect, in the past 2 years, you and Chen Fangqing have tortured them a lot. Chen Fangqing is dead, so the resentment will naturally focus on you. The young patriarch doesn't like you either. They may have conflicts with Emperor Dong's palace in the future, but they will definitely not stand on the side of Zhongzhou State, so you can't win over the Wang family of Beihai. And if the purgatory of heaven capital merges with Emperor Dong's palace, you can't find a force that can balance us in the whole Zhongzhou State or even the whole dark world, let alone a force that has the courage to stand against us in the open. The combination of Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun is not weak. At most, you can win over Wang Xiaoyao. If I recover from my injury, I can beat Jiang Shangyu. Although Gu Xingyun is tricky, Li Shi can also balance him. If Wang Xiaoyao takes action, Wang Yuexianga will not sit back and do nothing. Mo Raid's identity is special. Even if you dare to let him join Zhongzhou State openly, other invincible realm experts in Emperor Dong's palace can kill him. In this way, Li Tianlan has no opponent. Even Jiang Shangyu can't bear this kind of pressure. And once such a phenomenon appears, it proves that the Li family, after the merger of the purgatory of Heaven Capital and Emperor Dong's palace, has been out of control and completely out of the control of Zhongzhou State. President, I know you very well. You won't allow this to happen. Li Kuangtu smiled and said, if I really agree, you will stop it. If you can't stop it, then the overall power of Zhongzhou State will probably attack the Li family in all aspects. Emperor Dong's palace will suffer heavy losses, and so will the purgatory of Heaven Capital. But in the end, it's the Li family that will be weakened as a whole, right? After all, that silly boy is too young and not mature enough. He dotes on and trusts Qin Weibai too much, so he should have told Qin Weibai his bottom line long ago. Of course, Qin Weibai didn't disappoint his trust. But after all, she is not a member of the Li family, and she doesn't want to understand the Li family. That siren only has Li Tianlan in her eyes, and she doesn't care about anything else. This mentality will also make her go to extremes on anything related to Li Tianlan. She only wants Li Tianlan to be safe, and she doesn't care about anything else. The conditions put forward by Li Tianlan are very good, and I have the possibility to agree. Once I agree, I will first face the suppression of you in Zhongzhou State. Not to mention anything else. Just this alone is a risk in Qin Weibai's eyes, so she doesn't want to see this. And I've tried to kill her man many times, so she naturally can't tolerate me. That's why you and that silly boy came to talk to me today. He is now in full swing, like the sun at high noon, so he naturally won't think so much. Tut, this is the good thing about being immature. Young and frivolous, he dares to offend everyone. Our merger will cause Zhongzhou State to be afraid of us. Maybe he doesn't think of it, but he doesn't care. Look, this is Dong Huang's confidence. Qin Weibai is a very smart woman. The smartest thing about her is that she can protect Li Tianlan to the greatest extent, and, at the same time, she can make Li Tianlan not feel disgusted with her like she is doing it for his own good. So on this matter, she didn't persuade Li Tianlan, but asked you to come with him. Li Tianlan doesn't care about some things or is too lazy to see clearly, but Qin Weibai knows that I understand. In the face of the all-round suppression of Zhongzhou State, how can we fight? We can't fight. If we really fall out, Li Tianlan and I can barely survive. Zhongzhou State may suffer a great loss, but the Li family will be gone after all. That's my Li family. I'm extreme, paranoid, but also timid. I can see the consequences of what Li Tianlan dares to do, so I don't dare to do it, and I don't dare to agree to his conditions. Qin Weibai can see this, so when you walked into this room with him, the siren already knew the result. I refused Li Tianlan, and in the future, if she wants to kill me or plot against me, she will have no scruples. Li Kuangtu's voice was slow, but it was extremely stable and clear. Li Huacheng had been listening in silence. During the whole process, he smoked 2 cigarettes in a row. When Li Kuangtu's voice disappeared, he sighed and laughed. So you refused Li Tianlan, to some extent, to protect him? I am protecting the Li family. Li Kuangtu's voice was cold. In some ways, he and Li Tianlan had always had a tacit understanding. For example, he could use external forces to deal with Li Tianlan and even join forces with Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun, but he had never touched Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan could be merciless to him, but from beginning to end, at least before today, he had never targeted other people in the purgatory of Heaven Capital. In their hearts, each other's industries were their future industries, so both sides had a tacit understanding to protect these. Today, although Li Tianlan killed a few people in the purgatory of Heaven Capital, none of them were from the Li family. They were just high-level officials of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. He could fight with Li Tianlan to the death, but under the overall situation, he could not allow others to plot against the Li family. I suddenly think of the chaos in Snow Country. Li Huaqing smiled and said, "If you had known this day would come, would you still have lent your sword to Li Tianlan in Snow Country?" Chaos in Snow Country, trial day. It was because of the sword that Li Kuangtu lent to Li Tianlan that Li Tianlan could control Li Kuangtu's sword energy with perfect sword intent to rush out of the desperate situation and let the trial day come to an end. Yes, Li Kuangtu said lightly. At that time, he could be said to have lost the face of the Li family. After all, it was too ugly. Paranoid. Li Huaqing seemed to have completely understood the meaning of this word in the Li family. He nodded slowly and said, "Is this the reason you refused Li Tianlan? This is a reason you can accept." Li Huaqing said calmly. Reason? If he wanted to say it, he could say a lot. From the very beginning, he was not convinced that Li Honghe put all his chips on Li Tianlan. In Li Honghe's plan, everything in the purgatory of Heaven Capital was prepared for Li Tianlan. As Li Honghe's biological son, Li Kuangtu was just a transitional figure. How could he be convinced? In the Qingyan Temple in Lin, the dragon vein guarded by Master Xin Xuanzi had pulled him back from death. If the dragon vein condensed the fate of Zhongzhou State was given to him, then in the final battle of Heaven Capital, his first move was enough to defeat Wang Tianzong and the Wang family of Beihai. But the dragon vein was finally given to Li Tianlan by the old bald ass. How could he be willing? He was a young boy, an outsider of the Li family. Why did he do that? This was jealousy. Li Kuangtu never denied this. He was jealous of everything Li Tianlan had since he was a child, which should have been his. So he held the purgatory of Heaven Capital in his hand tightly, trying to seize the opportunity to make the boy who occupied everything he had disappear completely. Li Tianlan entered the secular world. The chaos in East Island began. Before he could do anything, the Samsara Palace had blocked the gate of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. So the final battle of Heaven Capital changed from killing Li Tianlan to cooperating with the Samsara Palace to let the purgatory of Heaven Capital enter the secular world smoothly. And all this was because of the Samsara Palace, because of a woman who even he was amazed by, who was known as a goddess in the dark world. At that time, Li Kuangtu understood that even if he held the purgatory of Heaven Capital tightly, the young boy he had always been jealous of and looked down upon would stand up again in another direction with the power of a woman, and then become his biggest opponent to control the Li family. Li Kuangtu's failure was because of women. Li Tianlan's success was also because of women. The contrast was so obvious. How could Li Kuangtu not be jealous? There was also his first son, whom he had high hopes for and had already raised, who died in Ninghu. Some clues almost pointed to the Samsara Palace. Although there was no evidence, what evidence did people like Li Kuangtu need? The most important thing was, join Emperor Dong's palace. Li Kuangtu didn't want to. If he didn't want to, he didn't want to. They were all reasons. Every one of them was a reason. As for joining Emperor Dong's palace, Li Kuangtu couldn't think of an excuse to convince himself to ignore these reasons. It doesn't matter. Li Huaqing smiled and said, "At least this reason is true, and I can accept it. So, I'm free." Li Kuangtu's voice was a little dull. "I'll try my best." Li Huaqing said calmly, "Fight for your freedom. I'm 99% sure that I can take you out of the purgatory of Heaven Capital today." His voice paused. Li Huaqing looked at him and didn't speak. "The premise is, what can you do for me and for Zhongzhou State? Are you optimistic about Li Tianlan?" Li Kuangtu suddenly asked. "To be exact, it's the mature Tianlan that I'm optimistic about." Li Huaqing's expression was very serious. It's strange and contradictory. "So, you saved me today for Li Tianlan. Am I right?" Li Kuangtu suddenly laughed. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and directly acquiesced. Li Kuangtu was a smart man and mature enough. There was no need to hide some things because they couldn't be hidden at all. "I see." Li Kuangtu nodded and said, "If I join Emperor Dong's palace, the Li family will be out of control and completely out of control. This is not what you want. So, you want me to continue to be an enemy of Emperor Dong's palace?" "No, To be exact, you want me to continue to join forces with Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyan. In this way, the three of us can form a force that can balance Emperor Dong's palace. He stared into Li Huaqing's eyes and said, "You saved me just to let Li Tianlan kill me in the future. You want me to be a stumbling block on Li Tianlan's way to help him grow up quickly, or a whetstone? This is a test for Li Tianlan?" Li Guangtu's smile was a little twisted. "You're a smart man," Li Huaqing said slowly. "Do you agree or refuse? I won't be a puppet." Li Guangtu sneered and said, "If I leave Emperor Dong's palace, I will integrate all the forces in my hands, try my best to kill Li Tianlan at any cost, and take back the power of the Li family. In this matter, I won't show any mercy. If he dies in my hands, what will you do? Kill me?" Li Huaqing looked at him expressionlessly and said coldly, "You can kill Tianlan, which naturally proves that you are more valuable than Tianlan. Why should I kill you? In my heart, you are his whetstone, but you could be a knife." Li Guangtu looked into his eyes. Facing his eyes, Li Huaqing didn't give in at all. After a long time, Li Guangtu took a deep breath and slowly nodded. Li Huaqing turned and walked to the door. It was also straightforward. He said, "Wait for my news." Chapter 1259. The wind in Emperor Dong's palace was soft and comfortable. Li Tianlan sat at the table on the balcony, silently drinking tea and casually enjoying the scenery in Emperor Dong's palace. Qin Weibai, who got up a little late, arranged the fruit plate on the table into a pattern of smiling face. Her smile was like a flower. "Very happy?" Li Tianlan asked softly. "Yes, as long as you don't bully me. I am happy every day." Qin Weibai chuckled and reached out to touch Li Tianlan's hair. Li Tianlan grabbed her slightly cold and delicate palm and gently bit her fingers. Her white and slender fingers were stained with a little juice. It was fragrant and slightly sweet. Li Tianlan's whole body seemed to melt in this slight touch. He pulled Qin Weibai's body over and sat her on his lap. His other hand naturally wrapped around her waist. Qin Weibai laughed and took out a strawberry from the fruit plate. "Do you want to eat it?" Li Tianlan shook his head. His and Qin Weibai's eating habits were completely opposite. Qin Weibai usually drank the dew of a special plant that only grew near the polar circle. It was extremely demanding on the environment, temperature, light, and land. Emperor Dong's palace and the Lin clan had now set up this kind of laboratory to cultivate this plant. It cost a lot, but the harvest was not great. This plant could currently grow in Emperor Dong's palace, but Qin Weibai didn't like it very much, so her daily drinking was airlifted from Snow Country or Reki City. When it came to 3 meals a day, most of the time when the workload was not heavy, Qin Weibai's breakfast was usually a small but varied fruit, a piece of egg white, and half a glass of juice. When the workload was heavy, she would add a small steak and a small cup of coffee for breakfast. For lunch, she had 1 or 2 taels of rice, a small bowl of soup, and a few light vegetables. Basically, there was no meat. Most of the dinner was porridge, and occasionally she would eat some desserts she made herself. As for Li Tianlan's diet, fruit? Vegetables? What the hell were those? 3 meals a day, from morning to night, meat, meat, meat. Eating regularly to nourish the stomach were all nonsense. In terms of eating, he didn't like any fruit. The only thing he liked was meat, and he didn't even care about the taste. Qin Weibai took a small bite of the strawberry and laughed again. She sat on Li Tianlan's lap and gently twisted her waist. "Are you so happy because of Li Guangtu?" Li Tianlan asked suddenly. Qin Weibai was a little confused. She thought about it and nodded. "Part of the reason. I don't like this person, and I don't want to be with him. It's good that he can leave Emperor Dong's palace now." Li Tianlan played with her soft long hair and said nothing. Qin Weibai quietly ate the fruit. Her movements were very delicate. After she finished the strawberry in her hand, she picked up a wet towel and wiped her hands. Then, she wrapped her arms around Li Tianlan's neck and said softly, "Are you unhappy?" "Not really." Li Tianlan shook his head. "I gave him the best conditions, but he refused. It's a pity that we didn't reach an agreement." Regarding Li Guangtu, he didn't have any complicated thoughts. He didn't have a good impression of him, but he didn't dislike him much either. He and Li Kuang-tu were enemies, but Li Kuang-tu was a very stubborn person. Such people were often very pure. Even if they were enemies, he wasn't the kind of person who would make others gnash their teeth and want to kill him. After all, he is Rushi's father. If there is a chance, I don't want to let him go. If he leaves Emperor Dong's palace today, he will only die in the future, Li Tianlan said softly. And even if Grandpa doesn't like him, he doesn't want him to go this way. This is his own choice. Qin Weibai reached out and rubbed Li Tianlan's frowning eyebrows. How about the purgatory of heaven capital? There should be a group of people joining Emperor Dong's palace in the near future. Before I came back, I said what I should say. It's understandable that they think I'm an outsider. But Rushi is not. For those who really care about the Li family, they can completely accept that my and Rushi's children will inherit the Li family in the future. This is enough to make some people in the purgatory of heaven capital make up their minds to choose their own side. Li Tianlan said faintly, I don't want to get involved in the affairs of Emperor Dong's palace and the purgatory of heaven capital, and it's not necessary. When Li Kuang-tu goes back, let's see how many people will choose to come to Emperor Dong's palace. If they are willing to come, they are our people. If they are unwilling to come, they are our enemies. I won't give them too much time. It's not appropriate to move inside Zhongzhou State at this time, so I'll unify Tiannan first. I build a place for the Li family to live. When I drive the purgatory of heaven capital out of Tiannan, they can't say that I'm heartless. It's good that you know. I'll support you. Qin Weibai smiled sweetly. Li Tianlan nodded, thought for a moment, and suddenly said, Something happened in Yuzhou. Qin Weibai was a little confused. You said that something would happen in Yuzhou in the next few days, so that Li Huaqing would make up his mind to come to me. Li Tianlan's fingers rubbed Qin Weibai's slender waist. Li Huaqing has come, but it seems that nothing has happened in Yuzhou. Qin Weibai thought for a moment and smiled. She said, Maybe something has happened, but we can't see it? Of course, it's also possible that Li Huaqing suddenly figured it out. Li Tianlan didn't ask any more questions. He reached into his pocket, but found nothing. Shaking his head, he patted Qin Weibai's butt. Go get a pack of cigarettes. Qin Weibai said, Oh. She stood up and walked to the living room. Her figure swayed lazily, and she looked magnificent. The pleasant bell of the elevator rang for a moment. The elevator door opened. Li Huaqing's figure walked along the corridor to the balcony. Li Tianlan glanced at him and didn't get up. He just nodded and said, Sit down. Li Huaqing calmly sat down on the sofa opposite Li Tianlan. How's the talk? Li Tianlan asked. He gave Li Kuang-tu a choice. Li Kuang-tu didn't accept it, so he naturally wouldn't cover the room with sword energy. Now he just needed to know the result, and it didn't matter the process of their negotiation. It was a pleasant talk. Li Huaqing laughed. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes slightly. When he was about to say something, Qin Weibai, who had taken the cigarette, trotted over. Seeing Li Huaqing, she was slightly stunned, and then smiled and said hello. Make a pot of tea. Li Tianlan opened the cigarette, took out one, and said softly. Qin Weibai said, She smiled and said, Pua, or green tea. Green tea, a little stronger. Li Tianlan lit the cigarette. Li Huaqing was stunned for a moment, and then realized that the person sitting opposite him was Li Tianlan's real body. How long had it been? Had he returned from the purgatory of heaven capital? He opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. Qin Weibai said, and went out again. Li Huaqing looked at Qin Weibai's back and shook his head subconsciously. Lovely, gentle, and obedient. But he had never seen Qin Weibai like this. With a smile, Li Huaqing's voice was a little emotional. Sometimes, even I envy your luck. Li Tianlan took a drag on the cigarette and didn't respond to his teasing. He said straightforwardly, Let's talk. Li Huaqing's pupils contracted slightly, and he was silent. Li Tianlan was not in a hurry. He smoked and waited quietly. I'm taking Li Kuang-tu away today. Li Huaqing was silent for nearly a minute before he slowly said. His voice was indifferent, but he was full of confidence. Chapter 1260. From Li Huaqing's light voice, Li Tianlan felt a kind of almost strong confidence. This was undoubtedly a showdown. But why was it today? What Qin Weibai predicted should have happened in Yuzhou did not happen. Things in Liaodong were still in a stalemate. The Flourishing Age Fund was also as stable as Mount Tai. The situation in Zhongzhou State was generally calm. So why did Li Huacheng suddenly choose today to have a showdown with him? Was it because he valued Li Guangtu so much that he ran out of patience and was in a hurry to get him out to complete the layout before the election? Or was it because something happened inside the academics that could affect Li Huacheng's decision under the situation that no one could see and made Li Huacheng make up his mind? And this matter was obviously not suitable to be exposed now. Qin Weibai knew about this matter, but she did not choose to tell him. Was it because she did not know that this matter would be more beneficial to Emperor Dong's palace? Li Tianlan glanced in the direction of the living room. In his sight was Qin Weibai's slim and graceful back, light and elegant, and she looked very happy. This woman should be spanked again. Li Tianlan flicked the ash and looked at Li Huacheng. It seems that you really had a good talk. Li Huacheng laughed and said softly, he agreed to go with me. He agreed? Li Tianlan suddenly sneered. Did the president make a mistake? Or did he forget something? Li Guangtu is now my captive, a prisoner held here. He agreed to go with you? What value does Isle have here? I've locked him up here for so long. Do you think I can let him go just because he agrees? He narrowed his eyes and stared at Li Huacheng. You want to take him away without asking for my opinion. Go and ask him first. Oh, Emperor Dong's palace is a small family, and the president really does not take me seriously. Li Huacheng lowered his eyelids. His expression was neither happy nor angry, and his voice was neither salty nor indifferent. Then I will tell you now. I will take him away. What was strong? What was overbearing? At this moment, in the face of the president, whom many people thought had no temper, for the first time, Li Tianlan felt a great sense of oppression that almost hit him in the face. I do not agree. He tilted his head, looked at Li Huacheng, and sneered. My attitude is clear. I don't agree. I like to see if Li Huacheng can leave Emperor Dong's palace alive, if I don't nod my head today. Li Huacheng's body tensed for a moment. The corners of his mouth curled up into a half-smile. Li Huacheng, slip of the tongue, Li Tianlan said calmly. I want to talk about Li Guangtu. Slip of the tongue. Li Huacheng muttered faintly. This was indeed an explainable reason, but it could also be said that Li Tianlan thought so in his heart and said it directly out of straightforwardness. It could also be understood as Li Tianlan's threat. At most, they would just fall out. I believe you. Li Huacheng nodded. It's not important, Li Tianlan said. The important thing is that I have already said that I don't agree. Do you want to try to take him away by force? The tea is here. A voice with a hint of laughter rang out. Qin Weibai walked into the balcony with a delicate tray and placed 2 cups of tea in front of Li Tianlan and Li Huacheng respectively. The fragrance of tea and body floated gently. Li Huacheng was silent for a while, then laughed. Why? If I really wanted to take him away by force, he should be with me now. Li Tianlan turned the teacup expressionlessly, his eyes cold. Tianlan, you should know very well that Li Guangtu refused to join Emperor Dong's palace. In this situation, you offered such a generous offer, but he refused, which means that he can't join Emperor Dong's palace in the future. Li Huacheng said slowly. In this case, there is no point in keeping him here. It's much better than letting him out and giving Emperor Dong's palace one more opponent. Li Tianlan said lightly. Sounds like it. Li Huacheng nodded with a smile. But if you keep him locked up, how can you really annex the purgatory of Heaven Capital? A large part of the people in the purgatory of Heaven Capital are from the Li family. They may be on your side or on Li Guangtu's side, but to put it bluntly, they are in a dilemma. If you keep Li Guangtu, don't you worry that the purgatory of Heaven Capital and even the elders of the Li family in Emperor Dong's palace will have a knot in their hearts? Being locked up here, at least he can still be alive. Li Tianlan said calmly. Li Huacheng looked at him quietly and asked, You don't want to kill him? Li Tianlan nodded, but soon shook his head. To be honest, he didn't think about it. He didn't want to kill Li Guangtu before today. The best plan in his mind was the condition he proposed to Li Kuang-tu. This was also in line with the expectations of most people in the Li family. Emperor Dong's palace and the purgatory of heaven capital merged without large-scale conflicts. Both sides had their own gains, and they were harmonious. Divided live Li family reunited, with Li Tianlan as the leader and Li Kuang-tu as the assistant, so that the Li family could return to its peak and then create a dynasty similar to the Wang family of Beihai. This was the best ending, but Li Kuang-tu didn't accept it. How good was the condition he proposed? So good that there was only one condition left that could be better than the one he proposed. That was to let Li Kuang-tu become the palace master of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan would take a step back and become the deputy palace master and hand over everything in his hands to Li Kuang-tu. Apart from this, there was no better condition than what he offered Li Kuang-tu. Not even a little bit better. But Li Kuang-tu didn't accept it. At that moment, Li Tianlan's mood was very complicated. He was disappointed, angry, self-deprecating, and finally became indifferent. From a second, he left the room where Li Kuang-tu was imprisoned. In his mind, Li Kuang-tu was no longer a question of whether he wanted to kill him or not. Li Kuang-tu didn't accept the condition. It didn't matter whether he was proud, paranoid, or ungrateful, because they were enemies. All enemies could be killed. He felt that he had done his best to Li Kuang-tu. So your reason now is not a reason. Li Huacheng said blandly. You don't care about Li Kuang-tu's life or death now. As long as he leaves, you won't show him any mercy. In this case, you have no scruples about not wanting to kill him. Li Kuang-tu might have been important to you before, but now that he has chosen to be your enemy, he is not so important anymore. Now he is just your enemy. Just? Li Tianlan laughed. Do you know that your words are tantamount to asking me to let the tiger go back to the mountain? If I nod today, the Li family and Emperor Dong's palace are likely to pay the price of countless people's lives in the future. If Emperor Dong's palace wants to develop, some sacrifices are inevitable. Li Huacheng's voice was cold. Then I can at least choose to reduce one enemy. Li Tianlan said coldly. You can't choose. Li Huacheng did not hesitate to face Li Tianlan's sharpness. He was extremely calm. I don't agree, and Zhongzhou State doesn't agree. Purgatory of Heaven Capital, Li Kuang-tu must be your enemy. From another perspective, you can take this as a test from Zhongzhou State, or a test from me. Test. Li Tianlan seemed to have heard a joke and sneered. Why you test me? Li Huacheng picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. He said slowly, because I'm the president of Zhongzhou State now. Chapter 1261. Calm, plain, and condescending. Li Huacheng calmly looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. There was an unprecedented depth in his twinkling eyes. Just because I'm the president of Zhongzhou State. What does the position of president mean? All the major corporations advanced and retreated, playing for balance. Similarly, the Senate also had its own conflicts. Sitting in the position of the president, one had to face pressure from all sides. One had to understand compromise and balance, and there were all sorts of restrictions. But in any case, this position was the pinnacle of power in Zhongzhou State. At some point, if Li Huacheng really wanted to do something, then the so-called pressure and restrictions could be ignored. When he began to put the balance behind him and let the presidents will fully show, inside and outside Zhongzhou State, Li Tianlan, Dong Chengwudi, and even Wang Tianzong were unable to really resist this will. Because this will represented the world's strongest country, the world's most advanced destructive weapons, the world's most terrible wealth, the millions of troops in Zhongzhou State, and the public opinion that could suppress everything. As long as Li Huacheng nodded, all the resources of Zhongzhou State would become his weapons and sharp swords. All the resources. Under such sharpness, Emperor Dong's palace, the Wang family of Beihai, and the so-called wealthy families were like flying snow under the scorching sun, melting quietly. No one could be strong enough to defeat the whole world. At least not now. Wang Tianzong, who was at the peak, and Li Tianlan, who was invincible, fought against this will. The best result was to ensure their own survival. No matter how many trump cards and how deep the foundation of the power they built was, it would be directly destroyed in the moment when this will press down. Li Tianlan asked Li Huacheng why to test him. Because of this, the atmosphere on the balcony suddenly became extremely depressing. The gentle and refreshing wind stopped without a sound. The world was gloomy. Li Huacheng put down the teacup, took a special silver steak, picked up a piece of cantaloupe from the fruit plate, and put it into his mouth. He said with a smile, "Tianlan, can this identity test you?" Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and stared at Li Huacheng. His body was completely tense. Li Huacheng looked at him quietly and could clearly see the endless lightning and thunder in his eyes. He suddenly smiled and turned to look at Qin Weibai, who had been silent. He smiled and said, "Boss Qin, do you think I'm qualified to test Emperor Dawn's palace in Tianlan?" After serving tea, Qin Weibai had been sitting quietly beside Li Tianlan. She did not say a word, looking well-behaved and gentle. It seemed that she did not exist at all. But both Li Tianlan and Li Huacheng knew that when the topic reached an impasse, Qin Weibai was definitely the best buffer. Hearing Li Huacheng's question, Qin Weibai smiled and said softly, "The president is naturally qualified. This should be our honor. Everyone in Huacheng knows that those who can pass the president's test are all outstanding." The current MP of Zhongzhou State, Minister Cheng Shilai of the Ministry of Personnel, once said in private that he could have today's achievements because he passed several tests you gave him when he was young. Qin Weibai's voice was calm and unhurried. Her voice was very pleasant to the ears. No matter what the situation was, it was calm and elegant, clear and sweet. But when the content of her words fell into Li Huacheng's ears, the smile on his face suddenly froze. It was like a knife, quietly pressed against his heart when he straightened his chest and was about to fight with Li Tianlan to see who was better, and planned to use all his means to see who was better. Cheng Shilai, the Zhongzhou State Counselor of the Ministry of Personnel. This senior counselor, who was very low-key and never showed his talent, had an absolutely pivotal position in the academics. The whole academy had poured unimaginable efforts into Cheng Shilai. Cheng Shilai lived up to the academy's cultivation. He had reached his current position step by step and was recognized by almost all the groups. This was definitely not something that anyone could do, especially Cheng Shilai's current position. Cheng Shilai controlled the Ministry of Personnel. In some ways, he controlled the personnel power of Zhongzhou State. Cheng Shilai had absolute real power in the absolute heavyweight department. He could be recognized by all the groups in such a sensitive position. This alone was enough to show Cheng Shilai's ability. Li Huacheng had always regarded Cheng Shilai as his successor and had been grooming him. Cheng Shilai had been his secretary, the mayor of Liang, the deputy governor, and the mayor of the provincial government. He had entered the top government office in Yuzhou, charged electricity in the Youth Academy of Zhongzhou State, and served as the deputy speaker and the minister of the Ministry of Personnel in Liaodong. Then, he was transferred to the Ministry of Personnel as a deputy. In the year when Li Huacheng reached the peak, Cheng Shilai was the first deputy in the Ministry of Personnel. 5 years ago, he successfully entered the parliament and controlled the Ministry of Personnel. Li Huacheng's trust in him had never been shaken from beginning to end. Without the rise of the Li family, without the turmoil of the overall situation, Li Huacheng was unlikely to be re-elected in this election. Cheng Shilai was the new giant that Li Huacheng and the academy planned to replace after he retired. Now that Li Huacheng could be re-elected, the academy was surprised and had more expectations for Cheng Shilai. He was qualified to be a director this year, but Li Huacheng was still there. Cheng Shilai might as well accumulate for a few years instead of fighting with others for a position that was neither rising nor falling. If Li Huacheng did not retire, he would have the final say in who controlled the Ministry of Personnel. In this way, Cheng Shilai would not be moved. He would stay in the position of the Ministry of Personnel for another 5 years, which was enough for him to use the resources in his hands to really strengthen the academy and let his students spread all over Zhongzhou State. Li Huacheng could now use these 5 years to pave the way for him. Cheng Shilai in 5 years was naturally not the same as he was now. At that time, he would have enough capital to strive for the top. 5 years later, Li Huaqing retired, and Cheng Shilai replaced him. His goal was at least the prime minister of Zhongzhou state, and even a strong contender for the president. With Li Tianlan's negotiation this time was largely because of Cheng Shilai, because of Cheng Shilai's present, and also because of Cheng Shilai's future. Just as he had told Qin Weibai, he hoped that Li Tianlan could mature, be absolutely invincible in force, and be immovable in mind. He needed a real, fully mature, peerless heavenly son. Such a Li Tianlan was really worthy of him handing over Zhongzhou state to him. Li Huaqing bet that Li Tianlan could fully mature. More than 20 years later, Li Huaqing and the academics would fully support Li Tianlan to become the president of Zhongzhou state. This was a condition that Li Tianlan could not refuse. Once Li Tianlan agreed, the first thing to do was to ensure the influence and scale of the academics before he became the president. Only the support of the academics, which still maintained a strong influence after more than 20 years, was really valuable to him. Therefore, as long as Li Tianlan agreed to cooperate with Li Huaqing, the academics would immediately become Li Tianlan's firmest ally and supporter. Similarly, Li Tianlan would also become the firmest ally and supporter of the academics. The new group was now full of vitality. If it cooperated with the academics, at least in the next 20 years, the academics would not encounter any major crisis. During this period, it was enough for them to adjust the shortcomings of their own structure, make up for many defects, and increase their own foundation. Such cooperation was a real win-win situation. The academics won for a stable foundation for long-term development. The new group won for an infinitely bright future. With the support of Li Tianlan and the new group, the academics would naturally be more confident. Therefore, Li Huaqing already had the idea of pushing Cheng Shilai to the position of president 5 years later. As for Cheng Shilai's current situation, the reason why Li Huaqing chose to show his cards to Li Tianlan today was indeed because of Cheng Shilai. To be exact, it was a phone call from Cheng Shilai. The content of the phone call was somewhat inexplicable. Li Huaqing did not know what it meant at first, but now listening to Qin Weibai's soft voice, he understood everything in an instant. "Are you scheming about Shilai's matter?" Li Huaqing asked slowly. "What matter?" Qin Weibai blinked her eyes and said innocently, "I don't quite understand." Li Huaqing subconsciously clenched his fists, took a deep breath, and did not speak. He was a little angry in his heart, but this anger was suppressed by him before it burst out. At this time, extra emotions were meaningless at all. He came to negotiate with Li Tianlan today because of Cheng Shilai. Cheng Shilai talked to him on the phone last night, and what they talked about was just some of his own private affairs. Cheng Shilai's wife had died more than 10 years ago, leaving behind a daughter who is now the vice president of a multinational group in Zhongzhou region. In addition, Cheng Shilai had a son who was 10 years old this year. Cheng Shilai, who had not remarried for more than 10 years after losing his wife, had a 10-year-old son. It was clear what this meant. Li Huaqing knew the existence of that child and had seen him with his own eyes. During festivals, when he and Cheng Shilai met in private, he even gave the child several red envelopes. Illegitimate child. It sounded dishonorable, but that was it. Li Huaqing really did not take it seriously. When one status reached Cheng Shilai's level, no, even if it was 2 or 3 levels lower than him, basically no one fell because of the problem of lovers and illegitimate children. This kind of problem was not a problem at all when one reached a certain level, but when there was a problem, it would inevitably be raised. When the position was higher, at Cheng Shilai's level, almost all problems were no longer problems. The only problem for people at this level was whether the support from both above and below was enough. As for the rest, it cannot be said that it did not matter, but there was really no need to worry too much. Li Huaqing had seen the child and the woman beside Cheng Shilai. Although they had not seen each other many times, the woman had left a deep impression on him. It was almost difficult to find flaws in a woman in all aspects. Appearance, figure, Temperament, speech, talent, life, character, she was flawless in all aspects. Just like Qin Weibai now, but a woman who was a little different from Qin Weibai. Her name was Gu Qingxiu. Her identity as a mistress could be said to be Chang Shilai's only weakness. A weakness that could not be called a weakness. No one would take it seriously. Even Li Huacheng had turned a blind eye to this. He didn't care about it at all. But he did not expect that one day this woman might really become a target for others to attack Chang Shilai. From the beginning to the end, the existence of this woman was a trap. A near-fatal trap aimed at Chang Shilai. A lover was really nothing. But if this lover had an extraordinary identity, this kind of trouble was enough to give anyone a headache. Gu Qingxiu, the second-generation pavilion master of Phoenix Pavilion in Kunlun City. When this identity and this name were combined and passed to Li Huacheng's ears, Li Huacheng did not know how to react for a while. The most important thing was that Gu Qingxiu was going to turn herself in now. No one knew how this pavilion master of Phoenix Pavilion turned against Gu Xingyun, but this was the result. Gu Qingxiu wanted to turn herself in. What was even more absurd was that Chang Shilai was completely controlled by this woman. Even now, he didn't blame her. Instead, he wanted to protect her. With this news came a lot of trouble surrounding Li Huacheng. Gu Qingxiu wanted to turn herself in, but she could not. Kill her? Chang Shilai could not do it. What he showed on the phone was that he wanted to protect that woman at all costs, even if she really turned herself in. But if she turned herself in, then her identity and relationship with Chang Shilai would appear in the sight of everyone in Zhongzhou State for the first time. What would be the consequences? Everything that Chang Shilai had done over the years would be studied with a magnifying glass, nitpicking bones from eggs. If they really wanted to find problems specifically, who dared to say that they had no problems at all? Chang Shilai, the successor of Li Huacheng, might become the target of all groups for the first time. Gu Qingxiu did not use Chang Shilai to do anything. Chang Shilai might be able to have a clear conscience, but it was difficult for him to be as immovable as a mountain, under the focus of all groups. Even if he could keep his position as a member of parliament, he would inevitably give up his position in the Ministry of Personnel. First of all, this would directly hurt the interests of the academics. The academics would also be violently turbulent. They might be dissatisfied with Gu Qingxiu, but all their emotions would be concentrated and vented on the Special Warfare Group and Gu Xingyun. But now Gu Xingyun was still the object of Li Huacheng's protection. Gu Qingxiu was obviously stimulated by something now. She did not think about anything else at all. The only thing she thought about was to stab Gu Xingyun with a knife. But after this knife, what should Li Huacheng do? In the face of the group's dissatisfaction with Gu Xingyun, should he suppress it? Could he suppress it? Once this matter was exposed, it would affect Chang Shilai's position and inevitably affect Chang Shilai's ranking in the parliament in the future. This kind of influence was fatal for the academics. The culprit was Gu Xingyun. When a matter broke out, did they not target the culprit, but protect him? Li Huacheng could completely imagine the huge chaos within the academics at that time. Internal troubles were brewing, if coupled with the targeting of all groups. Chang Shilai might fall directly at a certain point in time, not to mention going further in 5 years. Gu Qingxiu, Phoenix Pavilion, Kunlun City, Gu Xingyun, Chang Shilai, one by one, the identities were connected together. If this matter was used by someone with ulterior motives, if his means were clever enough, this might be a huge storm that could sweep the entire academics. And there were people with such means, such intelligence, such standpoint, such power. Of course there were. Now there was one in front of Li Huacheng. Of course, it was not Li Tianlan. It was Qin Weibai, who didn't look sharp at all and acted like a little woman at home. The reason why Li Huacheng was in a hurry to negotiate with Li Tianlan was that he wanted to immediately return to Yuzhou after solving the matter between Emperor Dong's palace and Li Guangtu. He wanted to talk with Gu Qingxiu and Gu Xingyun to stabilize this matter. He originally thought that this might be the work of the Prince Group or perhaps someone else. But he never thought that the matter of Gu Qingxiu turned out to be the work of Qin Weibai. This meant that she not only had the intelligence and means to set off a storm, but also meant that she had already mastered the cause of this matter. This was well prepared. She was unprepared. Under such circumstances, even Li Huaqing was not sure that he could suppress Qin Weibai. Do you know Gu Qingxiu? Li Huaqing asked straightforwardly. He is a very interesting person, but he is also a very pitiful person. Qin Weibai's voice was soft. It's not easy to find him. Even Xian Yin doesn't know of his existence. You can think of it as a coincidence that I can find him. Gu Xingyun killed her whole family and trained her to be the pavilion master of Phoenix Pavilion. Now she knows her life experience and knows some truth. Well, yes. Qin Weibai smiled and looked magnificent. I told her these things. I mentioned some things accidentally in a chat. So now she should only think about revenge and let Gu Xingyun die a horrible death. If this matter makes you embarrassed, then I'm sorry to cause you trouble. She was plain, without sincerity, and with a sense of ridicule. Li Huaqing smiled bitterly. For the first time, he experienced the sense of powerlessness that many people had experienced in front of this woman. Everyone knew that she was not simple, but no one knew from which angle this woman would make a move every time. He originally wanted to use a strong attitude to force Li Tianlan to take a step back, so as to fight for more benefits. But now Qin Weibai's simple words, a Gu Qingxiu, and a trump card directly put him in a completely passive position. Boss Qin is really brilliant. Li Huaqing whispered, I don't think I underestimated you, but in the end, I still underestimated you. I have a friendship with Gu Qingxiu. Qin Weibai said faintly. Now she just wants revenge. She wants Gu Xingyun to lose everything, and she still has feelings for Minister Cheng. Li Huaqing was silent. He understood what Qin Weibai meant. Gu Qingxiu's goal was only to let Gu Xingyun pay the price. She wanted revenge. So now the only condition for her to give up surrendering was to let Gu Xingyun lose more things and then use this as a bargaining chip, asking Qin Weibai to take this bargaining chip to persuade Gu Qingxiu. Since Qin Weibai had made a move, then what Gu Xingyun lost this time would naturally be transferred to Li Tianlan. And in such a bargaining chip, what Gu Xingyun lost was the most important. At present, at least the idea of letting Li Tianlan serve as a special advisor of Zhongzhou State and letting Gu Xingyun continue to be the war god of Zhongzhou State should be unrealistic. Li Huaqing could save Gu Xingyun, but the position of the war god of defense, they had fallen. Chapter 1262. The atmosphere seemed to have changed unconsciously. Li Huaqing was negotiating with Li Tianlan. The two were at loggerheads, neither giving way to the other. But to put it bluntly, neither of them really wanted to turn against each other. The strong and radical attitude was nothing more than to fight for more benefits. If Li Huaqing wanted to take Li Quangtu away, he had to give an explanation to Emperor Dong's palace. That was to say, he had to give benefits. It was just a matter of how much. If he could suppress Li Tianlan, he could naturally pay a lot less. And Li Tianlan didn't care about Li Quangtu now. He captured Li Quangtu and gave him enough time to calm down. After calming down, Li Quangtu could see the situation clearly, see the gap between himself and Li Tianlan, and see a lot of things. At the same time, he gave Li Quangtu the best conditions. He had done all that he could give and do. What else could he do? Li Quangtu didn't accept his conditions, so he naturally didn't matter to Li Tianlan. It was ridiculous to say that there was any affection between Li Quangtu and Li Tianlan. They had no blood relationship. They were nominal father and son, and they never really admitted anything. They seemed to be in a state of opposition from the very beginning. Li Tianlan captured Li Quangtu, and Li Quangtu refused the olive branch of Emperor Dong's palace. Why couldn't Li Tianlan let it go? He wanted a rope in Emperor Dong's palace and let the Li family become one in a real sense. Li Quangtu refused. Without him, Li Tianlan could also make the Li family better. Now handing over Li Quangtu and letting Li Huaqing take him away was nothing more than one more enemy in the future. It was one more enemy for Li Tianlan. Not Emperor Dong's palace. Emperor Dong's palace, purgatory of heaven capital. Li Tianlan Li Kuang too. Both sides regarded each other's industry as their own property. The only difference now was that a large part of the power of Purgatory of Heaven Capital would really become Li Tianlan's property, while Li Kuang-tu hadn't gotten a scent of Emperor Dong's palace. Although the facts were in front of him, but he still had a dream. Li Kuang-tu wouldn't give up this plan. Now that he had left Emperor Dong's palace, he would naturally carry out this plan in the future. As long as he didn't give up this dream, he wouldn't kill Emperor Dong's palace. He would only kill Li Tianlan. His martial arts foundation had not actually recovered. He was using his mental strength to simulate the sword aura. His attainments in the field of mental strength were extraordinary, and he was infinitely close to the transcendent realm. But Li Tianlan was really not afraid of it. He didn't even have the slightest scruple. It was hard for Li Tianlan to tell his specific state now. Strictly speaking, in terms of realms, Lin Fengting, Li Kuang-tu, and even Jiang Shangyu were all higher than him. Li Tianlan was only in the invincible realm now. Well, the invincible realm that was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm. His true state was the same as the current Moon Gaze song. However, things like realms were completely meaningless to him. Before breaking through to the invincible realm, Li Tianlan already felt that there was something wrong with the so-called four realms of martial arts and the invincible realm. There was a certain logic to the existence of realms, but it was not comprehensive. If martial arts were to be interpreted in an all-round way, then it would definitely not be a realm. Martial arts could be summarized into realms, but it was difficult to fully explain martial arts with realms. Therefore, Li Tianlan didn't care about the so-called realms at all. A description that was difficult to justify itself in the current situation was no longer important to him. He was now trying to subdivide his martial arts into detailed things that could fully explain his own combat power. For example, strength, speed, explosive power, defense, willpower, body balance, and physical endurance. For example, sword energy, sword intent, and sword momentum. The so-called martial arts were the most basic and original things. Only these things were the real theory of martial arts. However, this theory was not mature in Li Tianlan's mind. He always felt that there was something missing in the theory he was currently constructing, which might be the key to his breakthrough again. But he still couldn't figure out what he was missing. It was proficiency, mastery, control, understanding, and application. These seemed to be right, but they were always not all right. There was no answer, which meant that he had no hope of breaking through. However, as he kept thinking and denying, his combat power was rising and soaring almost every minute and second. Li Tianlan actually knew very well what it meant for him to be invincible in the world now. It meant that in this era, his actual combat power was really invincible in the world. Li Kuang-tu, Gu Xingyun, and Jiang Shangyu were no match for him together. Even with Wang Shengxiao and Wang Xiaoyao, it was difficult for them to be his match. But it was only in this era. Now he was still no match for Wang Tianzong at his peak. Even if he had ruthlessness now. But even if he had ruthlessness with insufficient energy, he was no match for Wang Tianzong that night in Mormons. Ruthlessness's charging speed had been several times faster now, but it would take at least 10 years to be fully charged. 10 years later, it would be ruthlessness's peak. At that time, with Li Tianlan's current realm, he would probably be able to replicate the eternal sword above Mormons without suffering too much injury. But now he couldn't. His real combat power seemed to be close to Wang Tianzong's at that time. However, that seemingly small gap was like a real moat. Li Tianlan could perceive that when he crossed the moat, the whole world should change dramatically in his eyes. And the key to crossing this moat was what he had been thinking about. It was the key that was missing in his martial arts theory. He didn't know what the key was, but he had been thinking about it. And his martial arts also made rapid progress in this kind of thinking, which could be said to be 1,000 miles in a day. No matter how impossible it seemed to be to cross the moat, it would be crossed by him with this kind of progress. So what if Li Kuang-tu was infinitely close to the transcendent realm? The so-called infinitely close was also incomparably far away from reaching it. Li Tianlan was completely confident that he could reach the end of martial arts one step ahead of Li Kuang-tu. That end might not be a breakthrough, but in the progress of his martial arts, he would have the combat power to rival Wang Tianzong and even suppress Wang Tianzong before the breakthrough. In that case, what would Li Kuang-tu be? This was Li Tianlan's current mentality. It was an extremely contradictory, inexplicable, but real state of mind, which made him think that this kind of reality was really real. He was confident that his combat power would enter a new level in continuous progress. But his realm would not break through. No, it was not the realm, it was the kind of thing that he had been thinking about. But it was difficult to express. This kind of thing should be a great increase in combat power, but it should not be a positive combat power, or something else. Li Tianlan couldn't express this feeling, but standing at his current height, he could feel a kind of vague suppression, even suppressing his thoughts. His combat power could break through, but his thoughts seemed to be imprisoned. During this time, Li Tianlan had always felt that he could communicate with Wang Tianzong after he recovered to see if he knew what it was that he had been unable to figure out. If he couldn't answer this question, it could only mean that in fact, he didn't really break through, but let his combat power enter that level little by little, just like himself now. In martial arts, Wang Tianzong was almost his only opponent. Wang Tianzong didn't come out. He didn't like anyone. Jiang Shangyu couldn't, Gu Xingyan couldn't, and Li Kuang-tu couldn't either. So now for him, since he could let go of Li Kuang-tu, it didn't matter to let Li Huaqing take him away, as long as he could give enough benefits. The tit-for-tat between Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan was also about this. Li Huaqing even did not hesitate to use his identity to suppress Li Tianlan. Doing so would undoubtedly be a little embarrassing, but his identity and position were at the top of the table. As long as he used it, he thought that Li Tianlan must bow his head. He asked Li Tianlan if he was qualified to test Li Tianlan because he was the president. What else could Li Tianlan say? If he dared to say it was not enough, then Emperor Dong's palace and the parliament would completely fall out, which was equivalent to his formal treason. Li Tianlan also knew this, so he couldn't say it was not enough. If he couldn't say it, he could only bow his head. Li Huaqing was originally waiting for Li Tianlan to bow his head. He even wanted to give Li Tianlan a way out and let Qin Weibai bow his head for him. So he threw this question to Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai didn't play cards according to the routine. No, this woman didn't play cards at all. In a few simple words, she directly hit Li Huaqing's vital point. Emperor Dong's palace? Li Kuang-tu? She didn't care about these. These seemed to be the reasons for the dispute between the two sides. But now, the real reason for their dispute was just because of interests. Li Kuang-tu said that she was a witch. A witch could see through people's hearts. She might not be able to do this, but she could see the whole situation from the perspective of an outsider. Every detail was in her eyes. This was not cleverness. Li Huaqing might not want to admit it, but he had to admit it. This was wisdom. So Qin Weibai bypassed the factors such as Li Kuang-tu of Emperor Dong's palace and stabbed the academic's vital point with a knife, throwing out Cheng Shilai, the trump card. This was her layout, and it also played the best role when it was most needed. For Li Huaqing, for the academics, Cheng Shilai couldn't give up. He couldn't make the slightest mistake in his future path. The academy had poured too many resources into him and placed too much hope on him. Cheng Shilai didn't let anyone down. The only mistake he made was having a special lover. That was all. That was all. Gu Qingqiu never asked Cheng Shilai to do anything. If the Special Warfare Group continued to develop, maybe after Cheng Shilai became a director, Gu Xingyun would really use Gu Qingqiu, the trump card. But now, Cheng Shilai was completely innocent. Things came to this point just because of Gu Qingqiu's special identity. It was Qin Weibai who added a special layer of life experience to this special identity. So Gu Qingqiu lost control. She wanted to turn herself in, to retaliate against Gu Xingyun, and to make Gu Xingyun lose everything. She had this power now. The Phoenix Pavilion Master seduced the current leader of the academics. Once the matter was exposed, Kunlun City would undoubtedly be targeted and hated by the entire academics. Based on the current situation of Kunlun City, once the academics gave up protecting them, Li Tianlan could easily destroy the entire Kunlun city. The academics hated Gu Xingyun, but Li Huacheng had to protect Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun, Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu's shrine could not be lost. It was an important chip to balance Li Tianlan. Without any one of them, the weight of this chip would plummet. He had to protect Gu Xingyun. But if the matter was exposed, if he protected Gu Xingyun, it meant that he, the big boss of the academics, would first have an extremely fierce conflict with countless people in his own group. What was this? If things really got out of hand, no matter what the result was, Cheng Shilai was bound to be sacrificed. It was difficult to satisfy both sides. So he was in a hurry to negotiate with Li Tianlan. He planned to use Li Tianlan to face the next storm after the two sides reached an agreement. But Qin Weibai's words suggested another way. As long as Gu Qingxiu did not turn himself in, then everything would be easy to deal with. Gu Xingyun knew Gu Qingxiu's identity, but he now relied on the academics to protect him, so he certainly did not dare to say anything. If Gu Qingxiu did not say anything, then this matter would be a secret. This was Qin Weibai's arrangement. She could arrange it, and naturally, she would have the ability to close the net. She could make Gu Qingxiu give up turning himself in without being killed and completely provoking Cheng Shilai. And Qin Weibai was now asking him for a bargaining chip that could persuade Gu Qingxiu. Such a bargaining chip, what could it be? Naturally, she wanted to suppress Gu Xingyun and get more benefits from him. This benefit naturally had to be given to Qin Weibai. Was there any difference between giving it to Qin Weibai and giving it to Li Tianlan? And to say the least, only by giving this benefit to Li Tianlan could Gu Qingxiu believe Qin Weibai's words to persuade him. Then she would give up turning herself in, and her hope of revenge would also change from self-destruction to relying on Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace to avenge her. Cheng Shilai could not let go of Gu Qingxiu. In this way, with Gu Qingxiu as a bridge, Cheng Shilai, the next leader of the academy, would establish a subtle relationship with Emperor Dong's palace. If the academy and a new group joined hands, this relationship would undoubtedly be more in line with Li Huacheng's interests. This was Qin Weibai's arrangement. Now she was sitting opposite Li Huacheng, enjoying the wind, quiet and gentle, but it was equivalent to directly telling Li Huacheng, "I have paved the way for you, and I have given you the steps. Why don't you give Zhongzhou State to me? What are you hesitating for?" Li Huacheng sat in silence. After controlling Zhongzhou State for so many years, it was the first time that he felt embarrassed and embarrassed. This was equivalent to being forced by Qin Weibai to cooperate with Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took out another cigarette and lit it. Naturally, he could also feel the change in Li Huacheng. Seeing that the president seemed to be forced into a corner by his wife, he took a drag of the cigarette. He reached out and grabbed a strand of Qin Weibai's long hair and played with it, with a satisfied smile in his eyes. Qin Weibai wrinkled her nose and rolled her eyes at him. Li Huacheng watched this scene quietly and suddenly felt extremely envious. No, it was jealousy. It was really difficult for him to evaluate this woman. An extraordinary woman who was rarely seen in Zhongzhou State for hundreds of years. A demoness who could bring disaster to the country and people. A goddess who could topple countries and cities. They were both, and they weren't. Her graceful bearing, her outstanding beauty, in the eyes of Li Huacheng, who was already over 70 years of age, could already be regarded as ordinary. However, she did not dare to underestimate her because of her intelligence and keen mind. If it were in ancient times, or if there was no Li Tianlan, it was hard to imagine what this woman would become. She was not a goddess who was high and mighty for ordinary people to worship and revere. She was the kind of goddess who could make most men bow their heads and crawl in awe just by standing here. Empress. But now, because of the appearance of Li Tianlan, she became a little woman who knew how to restrain all her sharpness. Empress? She didn't care. She chose to push her man onto the throne. She chose to use all her deep and secretive scheming methods in the dark, all for the man beside her. There was a saying, men conquered the world, and women conquered the world by conquering men. But what was going on now? A woman conquered the world and then gave it to her man? Li Huaqing's eyes were a little complicated. Do you know what is most enviable about you? He looked at Li Tianlan and asked softly. Tell me. Li Tianlan played with Qin Weibai's hair. Seeing that she seemed to be a little disobedient, he pulled her hair gently, not willing to use too much force. Looking at the corners of Qin Weibai's mouth, Li Tianlan smiled more and more relaxed. It's not your talent in martial arts, not your invincibility, not because you are the heir of the Li family. Li Huaqing's voice was low. He pointed to Qin Weibai and whispered, the most enviable thing about you is that you have her. With such a woman by his side, as a man, it was really too damn worry-free. What was a good wife? That was it. She was strong and domineering in the outside world, but amorous inside. She knew strategy, knew how to taste, had a sense of propriety, and was elegant and generous. She could straighten out the harem, deal with family problems, and take care of the relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Li Tianlan and the Dongshan clan were now harmonious, which also showed Qin Weibai's thoughts. She was the type of woman that every man dreamed of. Who didn't want her? Everyone wanted her, but only Li Tianlan had it. If I weren't old, maybe I would lose my mind because of jealousy of you. Li Huaqing sighed. Is there something in the president's words? Li Tianlan smiled carelessly. Li Huaqing did not admit or deny it. He just looked at Qin Weibai again and asked, Gu Xingyun, how about taking a step back? Qin Weibai's smile was subtle and elegant. She looked at Li Tianlan and did not speak. Envious, jealous, Li Huaqing's mouth twitched and looked at Li Tianlan. Qin Weibai could make arrangements, but it was this boy who made the final decision. Li Huaqing took a deep breath and adjusted his emotions. Originally, Cheng Shilai's matter would cause a lot of trouble, but if Qin Weibai took action, it could be solved. He originally wanted to negotiate with Li Tianlan. Now it was just two things combined into one. As long as the two sides could reach an agreement today, they could save a lot of trouble in the future. Gu Xingyun is not worthy of the position. Li Tianlan picked up the teacup and took a sip, frowning slightly. I'll see if the water is boiled. Qin Weibai said softly, got up, and left the balcony. Li Tianlan continued, and his strength is a little weak. If you can do it, why don't you? Li Huaqing asked calmly. This was not a fit of pique. Since he decided to compromise and let Gu Xingyun take a step back, it was true that he thought Li Tianlan could do it. Then Li Tianlan would do it. Li Tianlan laughed. Do you trust me? As I said, I want to test you, but I don't intend to put you to death. Li Huaqing shook his head. It was me who proposed to let you be the special advisor of Zhongzhou State. In terms of power, you'll be slightly higher than Gu Xingyun. In this way, you can also take the initiative in the next situation. Not enough. Li Tianlan shook his head. Li Huaqing had expected it and nodded. Gu Xingyun can go. The parliament appointed you as the special advisor of Zhongzhou State and the war god of Zhongzhou State. Is that enough? I want to enter the parliament. Li Tianlan put down the teacup, looked at Li Huaqing, and said softly, enter the parliament. This was naturally different from the previous Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun's treatment was actually very high. He was at the same level as a director. It sounded a little higher than a member of parliament, and he could also attend the council meeting. But in many things, he only had the right to speak, but not the right to vote. To be exact, he was equivalent to a substitute director who did not enter the parliament and did not serve as a member of parliament. This identity sometimes played a big role, but sometimes it was extremely embarrassing, and its role was even far less than that of a member of parliament. What Li Tianlan needed was not the so-called same level as a director. Instead, it was better to take a step back. He served as the special advisor of Zhongzhou State and the war god of Zhongzhou State. At the same time, he would formally enter the parliament and become a member of Zhongzhou State. This identity controlled all the special warfare forces of Zhongzhou State. In terms of power, even in the parliament, he was a heavyweight who ranked at the top. This was also something that Gu Xingyun had planned for a long time. He was not qualified to take it, but today Li Tianlan was. I thought you were going to ask me to become a director. Li Huaqing laughed. Li Tianlan frowned. He did not understand the meaning of this sentence, so he simply asked, "Are you mocking me?" "No. Even if you want to be a director, I can help you with all my strength." Li Huaqing shook his head. "I'm not sure. There are too many variables." Li Tianlan shook his head. "And if I become a director, there will inevitably be one more director. It's so unstable. I just need to enter the parliament." Li Tianlan himself was too young, 23 years old. If he became a director of Zhongzhou State, it was not difficult to imagine how big the storm of public opinion would be in the whole Zhongzhou State. After all, a formal director was not like Gu Xingyun who hid in the dark before. It was to be officially announced by the parliament, exposed by the media, and roughly introduce his job. There were only a few directors. Now, Li Tianlan went up, which could be said to be the real teeth of the storm. As for the members of parliament, plus the major directors, there were more than 20. Li Tianlan might still be a little too young among a group of old men, and he would also be exposed by the media and known by the whole country. But compared with becoming a director, Li Tianlan would undoubtedly receive less attention. The most important thing was that the resistance to entering the parliament would also be much smaller. It was enough for the new group to have Wu Zhengmin enter the director's seat in this election. Li Tianlan entered the parliament, plus by Qing Qian, the substitute Zhou Yuanshan, and Ji Ankang of Jiangzhou, who was not very sure now. Such a lineup was enough. Is it stable to be a member of parliament instead of a director? Li Huaqing smiled. Li Tianlan also smiled. After all, stability was relative. In the case that the members of parliament in Zhongzhou State were generally in their 50s or 60s, a 23-year-old member of parliament suddenly intervened. No matter how low-key he was, it would be a real storm for the outside world. At that time, the people of the whole Zhongzhou State would know that he was the current guardian of Zhongzhou State and the first expert of Zhongzhou State. A series of structures that had been hidden in the dark, such as the special warfare system and the war god, would officially come out from the dark. This was enough to shock the whole Zhongzhou State. But Li Huaqing roughly understood Li Tianlan's meaning. It was indeed stable. Being a director and being a member of parliament were the same for the people of Zhongzhou State. They were both storms. But for the parliament, it was the opposite. There were only so many directors' positions, and everyone was fighting for them with all their might. Now there was no vacant position for Li Tianlan. There were relatively more seats for members of parliament, and Li Tianlan was fighting for the identity of a member of parliament. He already had a position that matched this identity. It was nothing more than giving Li Tianlan a position in the parliament, which was not difficult. As long as the parliament could accept him and be stable, Li Tianlan would not care about the outside world's public opinion. You want to be in this position because you want to be a shield for Yuan Shan, right? Li Huaqing said with a smile. Yes, but mainly for the overall interest. Li Tianlan said lightly. Zhou Yuanshan would also enter the parliament in this election, but because of his age and qualifications, it was impossible for him to be a member directly. He should be a substitute member. He was less than 40 years old this year. If there was no Li Tianlan, it would be Zhou Yuanshan who was put in the spotlight and stared at by everyone. And he was the candidate for the president of the new group 15 years later. Putting him in the spotlight was not good for the overall situation of the new group. Li Tianlan entered the parliament. A 23-year-old official member was definitely more eye-catching than a less than 40-year-old substitute member. This was also a way to protect Zhou Yuanshan, but it was also a helpless move, because the new group really didn't have many people who could go to the top. If there were many people like this, it would be best for Zhou Yuanshan not to enter the parliament this year. He had enough momentum. Pursuing power maximization in the short term would only make others uneasy. In this case, it's better to go further. Li Huaqing said slowly. It's not impossible to be a director directly. At least I have more than 70% confidence. This is not a bad thing for you, is it? Li Tianlan frowned and said nothing. Li Huaqing's meaning was a little strange. Of course, he could see the change in Li Huaqing's attitude. Originally, not to mention becoming a member or a director, he even didn't want to give Gu Xingyun the position of national war god. Now, it was good that he finally relented, but he actually supported him to become a director of Zhongzhou State in one step. Just as Li Huaqing said, this was really not a bad thing, but it was also not a good thing. Advantages and disadvantages were mixed. In that position, in layman's terms, Li Tianlan was put on the fire to roast. A new group rising fast. He and Wu Zhengmin became directors. At that time, not to mention the academics and the Prince group and the Southeast group, even the North group and the Giant group might have other ideas. The increase of power would naturally bring a lot of benefits, but at the same time, they would face a more complicated situation. What did Li Huaqing mean? Indeed, it's not a bad thing. Li Tianlan said slowly. Li Huaqing raised the corner of his mouth slightly. But I refuse, Li Tianlan said lightly. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and said nothing. Qin Weibai walked to the balcony again and added hot water to the teacups in front of them. I thought you wouldn't refuse, Li Huaqing said slowly. It's too troublesome. I'm not used to it, Li Tianlan said straightforwardly. Well, Li Huaqing shook his head. You can enter the parliament, but the positions such as a special advisor and national war god are still too vague for the outside world. If you want to go to the front, the parliament will inevitably announce your position. Although it won't be too detailed, it can't be too general. The parliament can't completely transparent the structure of the Secret Service. So, Li Huaqing smiled. If you don't want to be a director, then you can take a position in the army headquarters. Chapter 1263. A faint astonishment flashed through Li Tianlan's eyes. He didn't understand Li Huaqing's intention for a while. He was afraid that he would lose control if he had too much power in his hands. But in just a few words, the other party actually couldn't wait to give him more power. It was not a surprise for Li Tianlan to be able to enter the parliament, and it was no loss for Li Huaqing. This should be a condition that both sides could accept. It was a little weird that Li Huaqing was willing to help him become a counselor. Li Tianlan was unwilling to accept it, but he didn't embarrass him. Instead, he wanted to give him a position in the army headquarters. What position? This was a very obvious matter. After the election, or before the election, Li Tianlan's appointment would be issued. He would serve as a special advisor of Zhongzhou State and the National War God. And after the election, he would become a counselor of Zhongzhou State. With this identity, what position could he hold in the army headquarters? Obviously, it couldn't be the major theater of operations. The top leaders of the major theater of operations were not counselors. It couldn't be those headquarters. If it was one of those headquarters, it wouldn't just be a temporary position, but a real power. A position in the army headquarters. With Li Tianlan's current status and strength, he should at least be the deputy minister. This meant, no, deputy minister. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed, and he suddenly understood what Li Huaqing meant. Li Huaqing smiled and tasted the tea, and it seemed that he didn't mean anything. Li Huaqing also laughed. He gently knocked on the table in front of him and said directly, "You don't want me to live a little more comfortably?" This was what Li Huaqing meant. You want power. I can give it to you, but I just won't let you live a good life. I have to make you unhappy. You are still young. At this age, you are young and arrogant. You look down on the world and are confident that you are invincible. Live a good life? That's not what young people should do. Enjoying life in peace is not what young people should do. We old people should live a better life and enjoy today's prosperity and peace. You are young, of course, you have to fight. Li Tianlan was expressionless. Li Huaqing was also expressionless. These two chuckles were very vivid. Li Tianlan turned to look at Qin Weibai. Once again, Qin Weibai sat at her seat. She was languid and relaxed, like a cat basking in the sun on her own turf. She did not have the slightest intention to speak. Noticing Li Tianlan's gaze, she also raised her head and looked at Li Tianlan, her eyes a little obscure. Li Tianlan seemed to understand something. He turned his head and knocked on the table, muttering to himself. Qin Weibai's meaning was vague but obvious. A temporary post in the military. There were pros and cons to this matter. There was great trouble, but there were also great prospects. Moreover, This matter was not easy to accept, nor was it easy to reject. Naturally, it would be inappropriate to accept it. I can't accept it. He wants to be a senator. Li Huacheng gave it to him. He wanted the position of Heavenly Imperial Protector. Li Huacheng gave it to him. He wanted to suppress Gu Xingyun. Li Huacheng agreed. I don't want to be a director. Li Huacheng didn't object either. In the end, you didn't even agree to a position in the military. Do you really think that the parliament is run by your family? Now the Li of President Li Huacheng is not the Li of Li Tianlan. Therefore, Qin Weibai didn't give him a specific suggestion. She just told him that if he refused, it would not be good. This also made Li Tianlan understand the other meaning of her words. It was not because he was so smart, but Li Tianlan was very clear about his current bargaining chips. Gu Qingxiu, Cheng Shilai, Li Kuangtu. He now had enough bargaining chips in his hand. If he used this as a bargaining chip to refuse Li Huacheng and didn't want to be in the military, there was little room for Li Huacheng to fall out. However, Qin Weibai showed her bargaining chips, but she didn't use them to refuse the position in the military. This could only mean one thing. This bargaining chip could be exchanged for other benefits, more than refusing Li Huacheng now. If I refuse, Li Huacheng directly interrupted Li Tianlan's words and said with a smile, if you refuse, you refuse. It's not a big deal. It's just that compared with the status of a senator, a temporary post in the military is simply dispensable. If you don't want to go to the military, then you don't have to go to the parliament. It was really straightforward. Li Tianlan sighed with emotion. There was no pressure in this sentence, but it was the truth. After all, Li Huacheng was still in office. If he really didn't agree to let Li Tianlan enter the parliament, Li Tianlan really couldn't get in, unless he went all out or threatened with the bargaining chip in his hand. But in this way, if he used this bargaining chip, he really couldn't get anything back. And to enter the parliament, he had to go to the army. A nominal deputy minister of the army seemed dispensable, but to some extent, it could be said to be important. After all, Dong Qingwudi was still in office. The relationship between him and Dong Qingwudi was now no longer a secret in Zhongzhou State. At least he already knew what he should know. Of the father and son, one was the executive minister, and the other was the deputy minister. Temporary post? With Dong Qingwudi there, who would believe that Li Tianlan really wanted to take a temporary post? Whoever believed it was a fool. Even Li Tianlan himself didn't believe it. As long as his name appeared on the list of the army headquarters, he must also enter the council of the army headquarters. What kind of people were in this council? The number of people in this council was smaller than that of the Zhongzhou State Parliament. Every one of them was a real big shot. If Li Tianlan entered this council and Dong Qingwudi was there, he would inevitably have some power. And with this power, it was natural for him to get in touch with more authorities. Would Li Tianlan honestly take a temporary post that was harmless to humans and animals? People in the world, including Li Tianlan, wouldn't believe it. The most important thing was Yi Dongsheng. They wouldn't believe it either. If Wang Qinglei became a director through the channels of the Prince Group, then Yi Dongsheng's further resistance would be greatly reduced. Human affairs, at this level, they were connected to each other in the first place. The cooperation and competition of the major groups were also divided into different positions because of different goals and positions. The tit-for-tat between these groups was always relative, and it was impossible to really be all-around incompatible. Li Tianlan was now tit-for-tat with Li Huacheng, but it didn't mean that Hua Zhengyang and Wu Jin couldn't talk about cooperation in secret. The new group, the giant group, the Southeast Group. Dong Qingwudi, Wu Zhengmin, Bai Qingxian, Yi Dongsheng, Wang Xiyuan, and Wang Qinglei. This separation and merging was also a complicated and confusing scene in the eyes of an outsider, but it was exceptionally clear in the eyes of an insider. The giant group would support Yi Dongsheng to go further. For the Southeast Group, this decision suppressed Wang Qinglei and gave up part of the interests of the army headquarters. Similarly, the giant group was supporting Wen Xiyuan to enter the cabinet. The Southeast Group would also support Wu Jingmin and Bai Qingxian as the deputy prime minister and deputy prime minister to get more leadership of the cabinet. This was to form a new group. and the new group was now trying to suppress the Southeast group. This relationship really couldn't be said to be cooperation or opposition. It could only be said to be balance. And according to Li Huaqing's current proposal, when Dongxing Wudi had given up part of the interests of the army headquarters to Yi Dongsheng, Li Tianlan suddenly intervened. Fuck. Under such circumstances, Yi Dongsheng and the Southeast group probably couldn't even sleep. This was a completely indescribable threat. Yi Dongsheng was in danger of being completely overthrown at any minute. The Wang family of Beihai would inevitably make corresponding moves. Once they made a move, how could the Prince group ignore it? Li Tianlan entered the army headquarters and directly threatened the Southeast group. The indirect threat was the Prince group. In this way, what situation would Li Tianlan and the new group face? When Wu Jingmin and Bai Qingqian entered the cabinet, they encountered the challenge of Hua Jingyang's forces and had to deal with the pressure from Wen Siyuan. When Li Tianlan entered the parliament, he faced the luxury alliance of Gu Xingyun, Jiang Shangyu, and Li Guangtu. Under the situation of mutual checks and balances, Li Tianlan had to straighten out the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. At the same time, he had to face the counterattack of Yi Dongsheng, the god of army, together with Dongxing Wudi in the army headquarters, as well as the suppression from the Southeast group and the Prince group. How chaotic would such a situation be? It might not necessarily be chaotic, but the situation Li Tianlan faced would definitely be extremely complicated. It was like one shackle after another, tightly shrinking on Li Tianlan, making him uncomfortable every time he moved and even unable to move at all. This is deliberately embarrassing me? Li Tianlan asked with a smile. Embarrassing? Li Huaqing's expression seemed a little strange, and his voice was also a little strange. If you think this is embarrassing, then it is embarrassing. Tianlan, I just want to tell you that no one in the world is easy. It's not easy to have nothing, and it's even more difficult for people who have a country and control huge resources. Li Tianlan's eyes flickered. Before me, the academy could only be regarded as a relatively strong local group, and its influence in the center was extremely weak. I rose in Liaodong, walked step by step into Zhongzhou State, entered the parliament, and entered the council. What am I facing? There are endless competitors in the outside world, different visions within the group, the future development of Zhongzhou State, the internal balance of Zhongzhou State, and the turbulent international situation. This is the 10th year in my position. Li Huaqing smiled somewhat self-deprecatingly. I think I have a clear conscience in Zhongzhou State, but in the past 10 years, I have been very thoughtful. I have spent 5 points on the stability and balance of Zhongzhou State, 4 points on the development of Zhongzhou State, and 1 point on the internal planning of the group. Sometimes when I wake up, I can't even find where I am. What kind of situation am I facing? It's inside and outside the group. It's the intertwining of major groups. It's the deception of countries all over the world. It's the overall situation from top to bottom. This is what I should do in my position. No one is making things difficult for me. But is it difficult for me? Do I deserve all of this? It's said that your biological father is known as the god of massacre of Zhongzhou State and is majestic. But what does this glory represent? The life and death, honor and disgrace of the 550,000 troops of the Border Control Corps, the superficially obedient but secretly opposed by the various groups within the giant group. And Zhongzhou State is peaceful and prosperous. But you come from the border. When has the border been really peaceful? Zhongzhou State regards Invincible as the god of massacre, but they don't know that he has actually endured more times. Kill, kill, kill. How is it possible? When does he endure? When does he march? How does he keep the purity of the Border Control Corps and maintain their combat capability? Oh, the Border Control Corps used to be called a small army ministry. Such remarks are nothing but criticism. In the position of the Border Control Corps, he has to fight bravely and fiercely against foreign enemies. He has to be steady and determined. And at the same time, he has to face the pressure from the army headquarters and countless deceitful thoughts from within the group. Now that he has entered the army headquarters, he also has to worry about the Border Control Corps and the military power and operation of the entire Zhongzhou State. Is it difficult for him? This is what he should do in his position, and no one is making things difficult for him. Does he deserve it? Li Tianlan lit a cigarette and remained silent. I'm talking about your grandfather. The Li family has indeed been glorious. But Senior Li has been the war god of Zhongzhou State for more than 20 years. He has participated in hundreds of battles, big and small. Nearly half of the battles are with the invincible realm experts of other superpowers. He never retreated in a life-and-death battle. In peacetime, he has to stabilize the relationship with Beihai, maintain the autonomy of the Li family, and face the pressure of the parliament and the hostility of the Dark World. After the case of treason, he took the Li family to the border and supported the purgatory of Heaven Capital. He endured for more than 20 years, and he didn't really see the Li family return to its peak before he died. Who is making things difficult for him? Does he deserve it? The Wang family of Beihai has a history of more than 500 years. Its family history is almost the same as the history of Zhongzhou State. They were called the Wang family in the beginning. They fell behind and were revived by the chosen one ancestor. There was a time when they were called the Wang family's alliance. Later, they occupied half of Beihai. For about 20 years, they were called the royal family. Later, with the addition of the ancestors of the Lin clan, the two chosen ones at that time pushed the royal family to the peak together, and then it became the present Wang family of Beihai. Since these four words appeared, they have always been the first wealthy family in the Dark World. After hundreds of years of ups and downs, they have always been the first wealthy family in any situation. What was Wang Tianzong like in the past? He was known as the Sword Emperor, invincible in the world, with great talent and bold vision. But who could understand the pressure he bore? More than 20 million people in Beihai, the Southeast Group, and the glory of hundreds of years were pressed together. That pressure could really crush people to death. Generations of patriarchs of Beihai bore this pressure, because every generation of patriarchs knew that if they couldn't bear this pressure, they would die. Therefore, every generation of patriarchs of the Wang family of Beihai is a well-deserved expert, but also a veritable coward. That ancestor, the current Wang Tianzong and Wang Shengxiao, they have the same mentality, which is fear. In fear, they bear the pressure that can crush people to death. They are afraid that they can't do it well, afraid that they will lose everything, afraid that they will lose their families. Beihai is indeed a paradise for ordinary people and ordinary officials. But outside this paradise, there is the oppression on Mount Dibbing, the fear and dissatisfaction of the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. They are in such an environment. Did someone make things difficult for them? Do they deserve it? The teacup in Li Huaqing's hand made a soft sound. Li Huaqing's face was ruddy, and there was a clear agitation in his heart. Li Tianlan seemed to understand what he was going to say. He silently handed him a cigarette. Li Huaqing took it, lit it, took a deep breath, and watched the pale white smoke rising in front of him. He laughed again. At this moment, he looked at Li Tianlan with a strange look. The envy, jealousy, helplessness, sarcasm, and bitterness in his eyes were extremely complicated. I'm telling you all this because I want to tell you that no one in this world has it easy when they're in a high position. Tianlan, you have too much now. In terms of wealth, the Flourishing Age Fund is as rich as a country. Money is really a number for you. The luxury cars, houses, and even planes and yachts that ordinary people pursue are like a steamed bun and smelly tofu on a daily basis for you. In terms of status, you are already invincible, not to mention that you are about to become the youngest member of parliament in the history of Zhongzhou State. As the president of Zhongzhou State, I don't have any psychological advantage in front of you. You climb to the top of the divine list and control the new group. East Island, European land, South America, and Tiannan are all doing things according to your mood. They call you your majesty. You are high and mighty, with no rivals. Having reached this level of status, can you really be any higher? In terms of life, you are in your early 20s, and you are at the peak of your drive. The one by your side is the first beauty of Zhongzhou State. She is a goddess in the eyes of countless so-called big shots. She is obedient like a little wife by your side. If you're not satisfied, if you want other women, not to mention the unconscious first miss of the Dongchang clan and the missing little princess of the Wang family of Beihai, you can order other women at your beck and call. Boss Qin spoils you. I even think she won't say anything even if you have 3,000 beauties in Emperor Dong's palace. Well, Qin Weibai, who had been silent, suddenly smiled. Actually, I still care about this. Li Huaqing smiled and didn't answer. He continued, power, wealth, status, and life are all too complete for you. They're all too perfect. Tianlan, at this point, don't you feel confused? I don't know if you have this feeling. You just don't know what you should do, don't know the meaning of everything you have, and feel that everything you do is meaningless. You have no pursuit, and you don't even have a dream. Have you ever had this feeling? The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched. He didn't want to answer, but finally nodded. I always have. This was asking for a beating, but he really did. He really didn't know what he should do now. Spend money? He could buy most things all over the world, and he didn't even spend a fraction of his wealth. When he walked out of Emperor Dong's palace, as long as he showed his identity, there would be endless flattery. In terms of women, Qin Weibai could completely satisfy any fantasy he had about women. So what else was there? Plain, unadorned, and boring. Because you're different from everyone else. Li Huaqing whispered, it's not easy for all of us, but it's too easy for you, Tianlan. Maybe you have paid something for everything today, such as re-practicing martial arts, or traveling hundreds of kilometers in 3 years, but it's not enough, too far away. Everything you have today is too dreamy, too easy. It's not wrong to say that you young people have cheats. The so-called cheats, the so-called golden fingers. If it's me, it should be my current power. If it's Wang Tianzong, it's the family background of the Wang family of Beihai and his own talent. Everyone, more or less, has the so-called golden fingers. Do you know what your cheat is? Li Huaqing smiled. It's not your martial arts talent or even your current strength. Your biggest cheat. He pointed to Qin Weibai, who was sitting there holding juice and biting a straw. It's Boss Qin. If you didn't have her, even if you could grow up and have the current strength, you would never have the status you have now. If you didn't have her, even if you're now invincible, you would probably be busy fighting with Gu Xingyun, the current scale of Emperor Dong's palace. You can't even have 1% of it. Yes, Li Tianlan said casually. I'm also very helpless. It's like this casually. There's no other way. My wife is too capable, and she was afraid that I would be uncomfortable living off a woman. So she simply gave me all her properties. Living off a woman, I guess she didn't sleep. The corner of Li Huaqing's mouth twitched again and again. He resisted the urge to stand up and kick Li Tianlan and kept taking deep breaths. He was so pretentious that he was like an old Versailles. He smoked in silence. When the cigarette in his hand was finished, he took a deep breath, looked at Li Tianlan, and said with a smile, don't you want to change something? Change what? Li Tianlan glanced at him. Change Zhongzhou state. Li Huaqing's voice was powerful, clear, and steady. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. In fact, there's a lot more you can do. Li Huaqing said lightly, Zhongzhou state is now the most powerful country in the world with the strongest comprehensive national strength and at the top level in all aspects. But this doesn't mean that Zhongzhou state is a perfect country. Zhongzhou state is too big, and there are endless problems in all aspects. Even today, there are still poor areas, poor counties, and poor towns in Zhongzhou state. There are still too many barren areas that need to be changed in Zhongzhou state. Tianlan, join hands with me. All the sharpness and strength seemed to fade from Li Huaqing's voice, leaving only sincerity. We can change Zhongzhou state and make this country better and stronger. Believe me, when you change an area with your own strength and change the fate of countless people, you will be addicted. Every time I see the poor areas in Zhongzhou state and see the local people working hard to live, I can clearly feel my duty and responsibility. I've been the president for 10 years, and I have a clear conscience about Zhongzhou state. I'm the president, and I'm much stronger than you in terms of the resources I can mobilize. But I've never been confused because I always know what I'm going to do next and what I'm going to do in the future. Li Tianlan was silent and said nothing. Li Huaqing stood up, patted him on the shoulder, and walked to the edge of the balcony, looking at the beautiful scenery of Emperor Dong's palace that was built purely with money. If you want to change Zhongzhou State, you still have a long way to go because you're not mature enough. Tianlan, with Boss Qin by your side, everything you have now is too easy. It may sound harsh, but I still have to say that you are far from worthy of your foundation. You still have a long way to go to be mature. No one can say that his life is easy. I'm really making it difficult for you to enter the army headquarters or become a director, because I want you to feel the real difficulties, to understand yourself step by step in an incomparably complicated situation, and to let yourself mature completely. Only a Dongwang who has truly passed through numerous tests, faced countless storms, and felt the internal and external pressure without batting an eyelid can truly be called Your Majesty and be worthy of the two words, Chosen One. Li Huaqing's eyes looked into the distance. His voice was very gentle. In his almost gentle voice, he threw out the trump card that he had never revealed. I need you to mature, not just in terms of martial arts, but in any situation, in any aspect, to be invulnerable. Tianlan, are you interested in my current position, the president of Zhongzhou State? Have you ever thought about sitting in my position and have a try? Chapter 1264. Qin Weibai smiled dreamily, perfect and flawless. She had been looking forward to this scene and this sentence for a long time. Let Li Tianlan be the successor. Qin Weibai could be sure that no one in the entire Zhongzhou state could think of this except Li Huaqing and Qin Weibai. Li Huaqing's secretary, Ma Si, might have vaguely guessed everything, but she was not sure. This was Li Huaqing's personal madness. This was truly a huge gamble. And before this trump card was revealed, it was the time for Li Huaqing to hesitate before putting down his chips. His hesitation was reasonable, because if others knew this idea, almost everyone would think that Li Huaqing was crazy. Li Tianlan, the president, an invincible president of Zhongzhou State, a president who absolutely controlled his own group in great power. It was unprecedented. It was even unprecedented. In the hundreds of years of the Wang family of Beihai, even at its peak, there was only one female prime minister. The Southeast group had a president, but the Wang family of Beihai did not. The taboo was self-evident. If Li Tianlan could really mature, as Li Huaqing said in the future, could calmly deal with all kinds of complex situations, and could fearlessly recognize challenges, then the future of Zhongzhou State would indeed be extremely bright. The benefits of this were obvious. But behind the so-called benefits, it also represented risks that made countless people restless. The emergence of a strong and invincible president could indeed bring Zhongzhou State to a new peak. But at that time, would there be room for other people to live in Zhongzhou State? For the country, for the people, and for themselves. Why was Li Tianlan sitting in the president's position? Would his existence subvert the entire structure of Zhongzhou State? At that time, would Zhongzhou State be the Zhongzhou State of Zhongzhou State people, or a new, strong, and irresistible poison dynasty? No one knew, including Li Huaqing. So this was Li Huaqing's madness and gamble alone. He was really optimistic about Li Tianlan. Therefore, he wanted to take a gamble. But he was afraid that he could not bear the consequences of losing. So during this time in Emperor Dong's palace, he seemed to be calm about advancing and retreating, but he had been struggling and had not made up his mind. He did not dare to talk to Li Tianlan about this. This was the reason why he hesitated. Similarly, this would also be the reason why others would oppose this decision even if they risked their lives. Li Huaqing would hesitate, but the others were different. They couldn't believe it at all. Li Huaqing made such a choice because he really believed that Zhongzhou State would become better in Li Tianlan's hands. In other words, he was sure that his means could guide Li Tianlan to become a like-minded person in the next 20 years and guide him to become the leader that Zhongzhou State needed. It had nothing to do with nobility or selflessness. This was a concept. As for the others, no one dared to put their fate in the hands of others. Judging from Li Tianlan's current status and prestige, no one could be sure what height he would reach after more than 20 years. But what was certain was that once he really sat in the position of president, his will would almost become the only will of Zhongzhou state. The voices of the other groups were so insignificant and even pitiful in the face of this will. How could they possibly agree to such a ridiculous thing? Li Huaqing was sure that Li Tianlan would become a real president under his guidance in the future, not a poison genius. This was his philosophy, but others wouldn't trust him. Similarly, they wouldn't trust Li Huaqing. From another perspective, if the person who wanted to support Li Tianlan to become president was not Li Huaqing, but someone else, such as Chun Fangqin before and Guo Wentian now, Li Huaqing would also fully oppose it. This was an absolute conflict of ideas from different positions. Li Huaqing dared to take a gamble now. It was not so much that he chose to trust Li Tianlan after hesitation, but that he trusted his own means. When he said this, all the hesitation and entanglement in his heart had disappeared, leaving only calmness. This was what Qin Weibai was looking forward to and what she wanted to see most. Because from this moment on, Li Huaqing and the academics would automatically become Li Tianlan's staunch allies because of this sentence. Perhaps Li Tianlan would face a very complicated situation in the future, a very difficult situation of very great pressure. Maybe he would be embarrassed, angry, depressed. But what Li Huaqing said was actually right. In life, no one was really easy. She pushed Li Tianlan to the present height. Next, had to do something. The man she fell in love with was naturally not a Do who couldn't be helped. She firmly believed this. Next was Li Tianlan's era. Naturally, he was the only one who could really stand up to the sky. Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan and gently blinked. Her eyes were as bright as the Milky Way, flowing with starlight, mysterious and magnificent. Li Tianlan didn't notice her expression. He sat in the chair and was silent for a long time, looking a little stupefied. Try to sit in Li Huaqing's position. This sentence was very simple. But in Li Tianlan's ears, it was really earth-shattering. To be honest, this time he was really shocked by Li Huaqing. Become the president of Zhongzhou state. If this was Li Huaqing's trump card, this was a trump card that Li Tianlan had never thought of, but it was also a condition that Li Tianlan could not refuse. In life, what was the real peak of life? When he was young, Li Tianlan's answer was to restore the glory of the Li family. Now he had done it. So building a dynasty that dominated the dark world had become the goal he had been working hard to achieve. And now Li Huaqing showed a brand new peak and future in front of him. How could he refuse? This was no longer a question of whether he was tempted or not. Change the world, change Zhongzhou state, create the future. Everything that was illusory became possible in this sentence. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. He looked at Li Huaqing and asked seriously, "Do you believe me?" He didn't believe that Li Huaqing could not see the risks. But he still revealed this trump card. Was he forced? What was forced was the time to reveal this trump card, and it had nothing to do with the content of the trump card. I believe in myself. Li Huaqing smiled. Who knows what you will be like in more than 20 years? You don't know, and I don't know. What I believe is that I can train you to be a truly qualified leader. Li Tianlan completely understood what Li Huaqing meant by the test. Jiang Shangyu, Li Kuangtu, Gu Xingyan, these were indeed tests given by Li Huaqing. But it was only part of the test. The real test was all those who opposed him to become the president. Jiang Shangyu and the other two were part of it. The Southeast group must be part of it. The Wang family of Beihai was part of it. The Prince group was also part of it. The North group, which had joined the new group but had always had a subtle attitude, could also be counted as half of it. They would all oppose Li Tianlan to become the president. It was a desperate opposition. If he wanted to become the president, he had to either completely destroy them or completely conquer them. Only by suppressing all voices in this extremely complicated situation could Li Tianlan really pass the test and become truly mature. This goal was undoubtedly long and distant. But Li Tianlan now had enough capital. He had the support of the new group and the giant group. Now he also had the support of the academics and Emperor Dong's palace. This force was enough to support Li Tianlan to face any difficulties and any opponents. It was enough to support him to charge towards that goal. So it was meaningless to still struggle with whether to go to the army headquarters or to become a director. Entering the army headquarters would cause those people to feel uneasy. Becoming a director would also cause those people to rebound. But as long as Li Tianlan did not refuse Li Huaqing's temptation, then the competition with those people was inevitable. Li Tianlan could not refuse Li Huaqing's conditions. He did not know what he would become if he succeeded, what Zhongzhou state would become, or what height he would reach in the future. But those were not important. It was too far away to talk about those now. But it was precisely because it was far away that it became the clearest goal. With a goal, there would naturally be motivation. That position, the position that all groups have been seeking for hundreds of years since the founding of Zhongzhou State. The position that had been turbulent in Zhongzhou State for thousands of years, where heroes racked their brains to fight for supremacy. Everyone was dreaming of it, and everyone was striving for it. If Li Tianlan said that he was not interested, he would probably feel that he was so hypocritical that it was disgusting. His thoughts completely soared between Li Huaqing's words and silence, and in a trance, with unscrupulous sharpness. Li Huaqing looked at Li Tianlan quietly. He really believed in himself. So when the hesitation and struggle completely disappeared, the sense of oppression on his body became more and more clear. You haven't told me yet. Do you want to sit in my position and have a try? Yes. After a long and short silence, Li Tianlan finally opened his mouth. Just one word, clear and straightforward. Of course he wanted it. No one didn't want it. Even if he became the chosen one in the future. Even if Dong Wang came to the real end of martial arts. Even if he guarded Zhongzhou State in the future and kept his word. But no matter how rich he was, invincible in the world and powerful in the court, it was two different things compared with sitting in that position. Li Huaqing laughed. I can help you, and the academy can help you. Tianlan, we still have a long time. I will do my best to make you a real leader and make you realize what responsibility and what real ambition is. Li Tianlan's eyes were a little dazed. He suddenly thought of the consultant who had appeared beside him when he was in the desert prison. Zhou Tong, a name that had been forgotten by many people in Zhongzhou State. But he was also the strongest opponent that Li Huaqing had ever encountered in his life. Even Li Huaqing had to admit this. The game between the two of them more than 10 years ago seemed calm, but it was extremely tragic. Tit for tat, it affected the whole situation of Zhongzhou State. And some of the details, except for Zhou Tong and Li Huaqing, until now, no one knew. Everyone saw the final result. Zhou Tong, who had a slight upper hand, lost half a move at the last moment. It was okay to say that Li Huaqing overtook him at the bend, but it was okay to say that he fought back. The final result was clear. Li Huaqing became the crown prince of Zhongzhou State at that time. Zhou Tong retired in the year of his defeat. Then, 2 years later, he was secretly arrested without being announced and sent to the desert prison. And Li Huaqing became the crown prince. 2 years later, he ascended to his current position until now. Zhou Tong had always had a very special position in the desert prison. Similarly, he was also the prisoner that Li Tianlan valued most in the desert prison. His former identity, his experience, his vision, and his wisdom would not decline because he was in prison. His limitation was that he did not know the situation outside because he was in the desert. He had been infinitely close to the peak of power, but he had also failed miserably. After so many years, if he knew how to reflect, he would definitely be the person who knew what success was best. What he did not know, Li Tianlan knew. What Li Tianlan wanted to know, he knew. So in the desert prison, Li Tianlan asked him to be his personal advisor and asked him a lot of things. His experience, his means, and his decisions were what Li Tianlan needed to absorb. Compared with these, what Li Tianlan valued more was his identity. Zhou Tong came from the Prince Group. More than 10 years ago, he was able to compete with Li Huaqing for the position of Crown Prince. which was enough to show his status. He was the top tycoon of the Prince Group. In the years after he was defeated by Li Huaqing, part of his team was purged. But after all, it was not a competition of the same group. Many times, it was difficult for Li Huaqing to intervene in the backyard of the Prince Group. His considerable influence was protected by Chun Fangqing and Guo Wentian. Their influence could not interfere with the special place of the desert prison, but for Zhou Tong's son, they were trying their best to cultivate. Zhou Tong's son, Zhou Qi, was now the deputy speaker of Southwest City and one of the most popular backbone of the Prince Group. In this election, Zhou Qi would definitely go further. He would either become the mayor of Southwest City or the speaker of Talon Province. With his current status in the Prince Group, 5 years later, he would enter the parliament. It was almost a certainty that he would become the new leader of the Prince Group. And Zhou Tong's influence in the Prince Group was not only maintained by Zhou Qi. Although some of the old subordinates he had personally promoted did not enter the parliament, they had great influence in Tianfu, Southwest, Qianzhou, and Nanyang. It was no exaggeration to say that if Zhou Tong left the desert prison and regained his freedom, even if he did not hold any position, even if he had left the center of Zhongzhou State for many years, as long as he could come out, he would still be the top tycoon of the Prince Group. What Li Tianlan valued most was the great influence of Zhou Tong after he regained his freedom. He could give Zhou Tong freedom. As long as he could draw this old man to his side, Li Tianlan would have the right to speak in the Prince Group that could not be ignored. But Zhou Tong refused. He taught Li Tianlan a lot of things, but in the end, he did not choose to leave the desert prison with Li Tianlan. With his vision, after Li Tianlan explained the situation of the outside world to him, he could naturally understand Li Tianlan's position at that time and in the future, and he would also understand his position. He had many reasons to say, but in the end, he did not say much. He just said that he was used to the desert prison and was too lazy to go out. Li Tianlan still felt a little regretful that he did not bring Zhou Tong out. The old man did teach him a lot and gave him a high enough perspective. Now the new group was fighting for the right to speak in the cabinet, and the policy from top to bottom were all inspired by Zhou Tong. And if he could take Zhou Tong with him, it would be much easier for him to face Li Huaqing's test today to shut up the Prince Group. But there was no if, so it was a pity. Li Tianlan looked at Li Huaqing and nodded. Li Huaqing's eyes flashed. It was not the responsibility, ambition, or anything else he said, but a kind of persistence with very pure expectation. Maybe this was what he wanted Li Tianlan to learn. If you want, you can call me teacher. Li Huaqing smiled. Li Tianlan was stunned. A slender leg quietly stretched out and touched Li Tianlan's calf. There was no tablecloth on the table on the balcony, so Qin Weibai's movement naturally could not be hidden from Li Huaqing. He laughed, and his eyes were happy. Li Tianlan stood up and bowed slightly to Li Huaqing. Teacher, this bow did not lose anything, and it had nothing to do with face. But Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan had the most direct teacher-student relationship. The most direct benefit was that the academics could focus on supporting him from now on. From then on, in the next many years, Li Huaqing would try his best to teach Li Tianlan how to become a president, instead of just being an invincible heavenly sun in the dark world. It's not a peaceful time. I will return to Yuzhou today, and we will have plenty of time to meet in the future. The director or the army ministry, there is still time to consider. Li Huaqing smiled and nodded, and said in a gentle voice, if Li Tianlan chose to become a director, he would naturally live in the Hidden Dragon Sea in the future, which was the closest to Li Huaqing and convenient for classes. If he chose to become a member of parliament in the army ministry, then after the election, Li Tianlan would live in Dragon Lake Park, not far from Li Huaqing. There would be plenty of opportunities to meet. Li Tianlan nodded and said yes. Special Warfare Group is a good breakthrough. Li Huaqing continued to speak. If he wanted to go to the top and suppress all those who were not convinced, Special Warfare Group, Prince Group, Southeast Group, Wang family of Beihai, rice should be eaten one bite at a time. In this complicated situation, Special Warfare Group was the best breakthrough. Because in the future, Special Warfare Group would have Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, and Gu Xingyun. how to completely suppress them within the scope allowed by the rules, and even subdue or kill them was Li Tianlan's first test. I understand. Li Tianlan nodded. I've made it very clear to Li Kuang-tu. I'll take him away and give him freedom, but I'll ask him to be your whetstone. I won't participate too much in the affairs of Special Warfare Group. His voice paused. Looking at Li Tianlan's expression, he was not sure if Li Tianlan could understand what he meant. Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai laughed at the same time, with the same charm, very much like husband and wife. Li Huaqing said he wouldn't participate too much, but he didn't say that the academics wouldn't participate too much. This was solid support. Li Huaqing nodded and continued. Li Huaqing is not my man, neither are Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyan. Only you are my student. They know their position very well, so no one will be grateful to me for protecting them, and they will not give up their struggle. From now on, no one will be polite to you. I won't remind you of anything, but if one day you are killed by them, everything I said today will be meaningless. Li Tianlan smiled again. He smiled a little carelessly. Behind this unintentional carelessness, there was a kind of confidence that even Li Huaqing felt a little suffocated. What are you going to do about Special Warfare Group? Li Tianlan asked. The 5 Special Operations Departments still exist. Cancel the Special Operations Bureaus in each province and turn them into Special Operations Departments. Transfer the elites of the existing Special Operations Bureaus into the Special Operations Department and set up the Special Warfare Legion. Li Huaqing said slowly, you serve as a special advisor of Zhongzhou State and the war god of Zhongzhou State. You can rebuild Zhuanyuantai. Of course, you can also replace it with Emperor Dong's palace. After the study, the Parliament will officially confirm the weave of the Nightmare Legion and the Snowdance Corps, which will directly belong to you. Gu Xingyun will form the Kunlun Legion, Jiang Shangyu will form the Samsara Legion, and Li Kuang-tu will form the Purgatory Legion. At the same time, they will be under your jurisdiction. He rubbed his forehead. The 5 legions are united against the external forces, and the 5 special warfare divisions are against the internal forces. The Special Warfare Department will be under the leadership of both you and the military, and the division will be under your jurisdiction. There are still many details that need to be discussed, but once the general structure is confirmed, the rest is not difficult. You can make changes before and after the election. Of course, the special warfare system consisted of more than the combatants mentioned by Li Huaqing. There were also intelligence, resources, logistics, some secret bases overseas, some top-secret archery fields in the country, and some groups on the surface. This was an extremely complete system. When added together, it was incomparably huge. As for how to change it, the Parliament would discuss it. But as the new leader of the special warfare system, Li Tianlan's opinion was naturally crucial. The council was currently stuck with Li Kuang-tu. Now, Li Kuang-tu walked out of Emperor Dong's palace. Next, both the Senate and the Senate, even the think tank of Emperor Dong's palace, had to participate in the reform of the special warfare system. Li Tianlan nodded. After a moment of silence, he said calmly, let's go and see Li Kuang-tu again. Chapter 1265. Li Kuang-tu sat quietly on the sofa and had been silent for a long time. The clock in the room ticked. Li Kuang-tu held a cigarette and looked at the watch calmly. He wasn't worried about his ending today. Just like what he told Li Huaqing, he knew Li Huaqing better than Li Tianlan. Since Li Huaqing could appear in front of him, Li Kuang-tu firmly believed that he could leave Emperor Dong's palace today. He didn't know what Li Huaqing would promise Li Tianlan, what trump card he had, or how to persuade Emperor Dong's palace, but it didn't matter. It was enough that he knew what kind of person Li Huaqing was. The hour hand moved soundlessly by one tick. Li Kuang-tu, who had been waiting silently, also moved and looked at the cage that had imprisoned him for a long time. The environment here was actually good. Located in the castle of Emperor Dong's palace, it was naturally not too shabby. This should be a guest room. The structure of an apartment, the living room was simple and elegant, and the room was comfortable. There was a separate bathroom and washroom, but there was no kitchen, so there was no need for that. Li Tianlan didn't abuse him. He had different kinds of 3 meals a day, which were extremely sumptuous. When he was in prison here at the beginning, he was forbidden to smoke and drink, because his injury was so serious that it went deep into his internal organs. Someone sent him medicine every day. They were all Chinese medicine with mild properties, which seemed to be carefully brewed. When his injury was initially stabilized, cigarettes began to be provided, and then there was good wine. Zhonghua Mao Tai, all the same, whether you like it or not. Up until half a month ago, as his injuries healed, he could even choose his own food and drink. It was hard to say whether Li Tianlan was good or bad to him. Except that he couldn't walk freely, Li Tianlan met all his needs in life, took care of his injury, took care of his food, but did not allow him to walk freely, nor did he allow him to have any contact with the outside world. Every day, it was the guards of Emperor Dong's palace who brought him food and medicine, and they basically never talked to him. They would seriously write down his requests, but they never replied, just like mutes. Li Tianlan never looked at him. The two were in a stalemate, as if they would never talk to each other. Li Quantu could roughly understand what Li Tianlan meant. He didn't want to kill him, at least not before today. If he had not been captured, then in the future dispute between the purgatory of Heaven Capital and Emperor Dong's palace. Even if he failed, Li Tianlan would probably imprison him like today. Naturally, the rest of his life would not be as turbulent as before, but at least he could be guaranteed good food and drink. Li Quantu smiled, somewhat self-deprecating. He carefully recalled his captivity during this period of time and thought of Li Tianlan. The conditions that were previously stated after today, everything would be in the past. Li Quantu took out a cigarette, lit it, and smoked silently. There were 2 knocks on the door. Li Huacheng and Li Tianlan pushed the door open again and walked in. Li Quantu turned his head to look at the two of them, and his eyes narrowed subconsciously. In his sight, Li Huacheng walked in front, and Li Tianlan walked behind. This was the relationship that the two of them should have in everyone's hearts. But not long ago, when they came in, Li Tianlan was walking in front, and Li Huacheng was half a step behind. So it's settled? Did Li Tianlan lower his head? It was really fast. Li Quantu took a deep breath. The breath of freedom came to his face. Instead of joy, he suddenly felt a little lost. Even the freedom that was within reach seemed to become a little dull. We can go. Li Huacheng nodded to Li Quantu. Li Quantu looked at Li Tianlan and laughed. What did the president give you? He asked suddenly. You don't need to know. Li Tianlan's voice was indifferent. Li Quantu's smile remained unchanged, and he continued. The conditions you proposed before were really good. As he spoke, he was also quietly observing Li Huacheng. Li Huacheng smiled and said nothing. He was not afraid that Li Quantu would go back on his word. It was meaningless, because Li Tianlan was not stupid. Li Quantu joined Emperor Dong's palace now, and Li Tianlan could indeed get a lot of things. But now that Li Quantu had left, Li Tianlan would get the whole Zhongzhou state in the future. This bargaining chip was enough to crush everything. Li Quantu could not compare with it. The purgatory of Heaven Capital could not compare either. Sure enough, Li Tianlan shook his head and said without hesitation, "It's too late to regret." Li Quantu's pupils contracted very subtly. Of course, he didn't really regret it. He was just testing his value in Li Quantu's eyes to see what the president promised Li Tianlan for his freedom. Li Tianlan answered too simply and without hesitation, which was enough to show that what Li Huacheng promised him was far more attractive to Li Tianlan than himself and the purgatory of Heaven Capital combined. At least in Li Tianlan's eyes, that was the case. Tianlan is my student. Li Huacheng chuckled and suddenly said. Li Quantu froze for a moment and asked subconsciously, "What?" "I'm the teacher's student." Li Tianlan's voice was clear and steady. Li Quantu suddenly fell silent. He was silent for a long time before he laughed incredulously. Li Tianlan also laughed. "Are you crazy?" Li Quantu looked at Li Huacheng and asked word by word. Li Huacheng did not respond to him, but pointed to the door. "Are you going or not?" Li Quantu was so excited that he couldn't speak for a while. Li Tianlan became Li Huacheng's student. This answer was enough to explain everything. Li Huacheng had many students, but it could also be said that he had no students. He was the president and also the dean of a youth academy. So many people who had worked or studied in the youth academy could be regarded as Li Huacheng students. This was also the origin of the name academics. But the person who could openly call Li Huacheng teacher in front of everyone, before today, there was no such person. But now there was. Li Tianlan, Li Huacheng's student. What did this relationship mean? It meant that Li Huacheng directly announced the sensitive word of successor. Li Kuang-tu was the first to know. But then, the relationship between the two of them was enough to detonate the whole Zhongzhou state. Li Tianlan gave Li Huacheng the purgatory of heaven capital. But Li Huacheng gave Li Tianlan the whole Zhongzhou state. Li Kuang-tu completely understood what the phrase, "it's too late to regret" meant. In front of Li Huacheng's bargaining chip, he had no value to Li Tianlan. Worth. Li Kuang-tu took a deep breath and looked at Li Huacheng and asked. He didn't know he was so valuable. It's related to you, but not too much. Li Huacheng smiled and said, time will prove everything. Huh, time. Li Kuang-tu sneered and said directly, I don't agree with this. You're not qualified to say this. Li Tianlan said lightly. Is qualification important? Li Kuang-tu laughed and said, you can't succeed. I owe you for taking care of me during this time, but I don't intend to pay it back. I refuse your request today. As you said, we are real enemies from now on. Li Tianlan looked at him, expressionless. So, Li Kuang-tu said slowly, don't give me a chance. I'm not as hypocritical as you. Once I have a chance to kill you, I won't hesitate. You can't sit in that position. Li Tianlan gently twitched the corner of his mouth, raised his hand, and pointed to the door. Get out. Chapter 1266. Li Kuang-tu didn't get out. He stood in front of Li Tianlan, and his smile widened as if he was provoking him. No regrets. Let me remind you, no matter how wonderful the future is, it's not now. It is said that people should take a long-term view, but if it's too long-term, it's just a dream and unrealistic. After all, you have to look at what's under your feet and in front of you. Li Tianlan's eyes flickered, but he didn't speak. Li Kuang-tu fumbled in his pocket, took out a cigarette, and handed one to Li Tianlan. His martial arts and Li Tianlan's were of the same origin, so he could naturally see that Li Tianlan was now in his real body. Li Tianlan took the cigarette, lit it with a flick of his finger, and took a deep breath. It's true that you want to be the president, control this country, and become the most powerful person in the world, but that's all in the future. If I get out of this door today, if I fight against you with all my strength, I can't say that I can kill you, but it's really not difficult to cause you some trouble and give you substantial pressure. He held the cigarette and chuckled. At that time, you can't even fight against me. You're still too young. You should know that what we're going to face next is what I'm really good at. Are you done? Li Tianlan asked. Am I wrong? Li Kuang-tu raised his eyebrows slightly. Li Tianlan smiled. Yes, of course, he was right. He understood what Li Kuang-tu's words meant. Today, Li Kuang-tu left Emperor Dong's palace, and tomorrow, the Purgatory of Heaven capital would no longer exist. He would become the commander of the Purgatory Legion of Zhongzhou State. He was the top big shot in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. He could be said to be Li Tianlan's subordinate, and also his opponent. Li Tianlan had a commanding position, and Li Kuang-tu also had a chance to surpass the senior. As long as he left Emperor Dong's palace today, they would all be bound by various rules of Zhongzhou State. From the general direction of Zhongzhou State, Li Tianlan and Li Kuang-tu were colleagues and people on the same side. People on the same side who were on the opposite side. Headache, trouble, and complexity. Once this identity was confirmed, if Li Tianlan wanted to directly attack Li Kuang-tu, it would be a real treason. So no matter how the two fought, at least on the surface, no one could find fault. For Li Tianlan, who had the absolute advantage of force, this was the biggest limitation. Li Tianlan was too inexperienced to play games under these restrictions. He didn't even know the rules of the game. But Li Kuang-tu was not like this. Before the treason case, he was already the youngest marshal in Zhengzhou State at that time, the first commander of the Border Control Corps, and the young master of the Li family. If he had been an idiot with only strength but no brains at that time, it would have been impossible for the Wang family of Beihai to feel a sense of crisis. It was not difficult to play tricks. However, under the various restrictions, it was really not easy to play tricks within the rules of the game. And this just happened to be what Li Guangtu was best at back then. His strength was not as good as Li Tianlan's. But as long as Li Tianlan did not dare to flip the table, it was absolutely easy for him to create some pressure on Li Tianlan. You're right. Perhaps in this aspect, you do have many methods that I have never seen before. It's a pity that I'm not alone now, and there are no useless people in Emperor Dong's palace. If you want to play, there are many people who will accompany you to the end. If you're not convinced, just bring it on. He reached out and helped Li Huaqing tidy his collar. He smiled and said, I probably know that you always think that I owe you. Although I don't know what I owe you, no matter what I owe you, it should not be as important as my life. This time, I can kill you. The teacher coming to ask for you doesn't mean anything. You should know that if I didn't bring you back, no one could save you. You're not dead now. So even if I really owe you something, I've probably paid it off. So if you want to play, you could do whatever you want. When you fall into my hands next time, you won't have this treatment now. There was an emotion similar to jealousy in Li Guangtu's eyes. Now, Li Tianlan was indeed not alone. Emperor Dong's palace was full of talents. It could become the strongest superpower in the dark world today. It had a lot to do with Li Tianlan, but it also had nothing to do with Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was really young. However, the military counselors were all wily old foxes who had deep foresight. What's more, there was Qin Weibai above these old foxes. Li Guangtu had always longed for such an Emperor Dong's palace. Similarly, such an Emperor Dong's palace really didn't need to be afraid of Li Guangtu. Therefore, Li Tianlan was as calm as a mountain and full of confidence. You'll die, and I'll die. That's fair. Li Guangtu nodded and smiled a little strangely. Come on. Li Tianlan didn't know, Li Huaqing didn't know, and everyone didn't know that in fact, he didn't cooperate with Gu Xingyun. From the beginning to the end, he only cooperated with one person. That was Jiang Shangyu. It could be said that Li Guangtu was paranoid or had a sense of superiority in his heart. Li Guangtu really didn't take Li Tianlan seriously. It was not that he looked down on Li Tianlan, but that Li Tianlan was too young. He might be invincible in personal force, but personal force was not omnipotent. Sometimes it was even nothing. In Li Guangtu's mind, if the difficulty of Emperor Dong's palace was 10, Li Tianlan would take 30%, and the other 70% would be Qin Weibai. This siren was indeed the person he was most afraid of. It could even be said that as long as she was by Li Tianlan's side, he was unlikely to get the complete Emperor Dong's palace. Jiang Shangyu also seemed to know this. So when he found him to cooperate, he directly said that he had his own solution to this problem. Li Tianlan didn't have Qin Weibai by his side. What did this mean? That prospect was so beautiful that he couldn't imagine it. As long as he could go back today, the alliance of the three of them would be officially established. Next, it was time for them to play their cards. Your smile now makes me want to kill you. If there's nothing else, get out. Li Tianlan said in a cold voice. There is really one thing. Li Guangtu snorted and looked at Li Tianlan. How about I call you your majesty and ask you for a favor? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. Unless I can kill you, otherwise, if there is no accident, I probably won't come here again. Li Guangtu said slowly, if possible, I want to see my daughter. Li Tianlan was silent for a moment. Li Huaqing also narrowed his eyes. Few people in Emperor Dong's palace knew where Dongxing Rushi was. Naturally, there were even fewer people who could directly contact her. In Li Huaqing's mind, Li Guangtu's words undoubtedly meant that he was going to send him away so that he could spend time alone with Li Tianlan. But on this matter, he couldn't say anything. Li Tianlan nodded and said calmly, Okay, I'll talk to my teacher and ask Senior Yu to take you there. Li Huaqing relaxed his eyebrows and smiled. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.